Chapter 264. 20 minutes ago, on a tall building outside the Ginza district, the man named Guyu put down his binoculars. His face changed, and his expression became sluggish. After a long time, a bone-white mask appeared on his face. On it was a face that seemed to be in deep sleep, but it was lifeless. It made people want to avoid it. But after Guyu's face was removed, the mask seemed much more lively. The drooping eyes looked up, and the yellow eyeballs slowly turned twice, as if they had not seen light for a long time. Unfortunately, I can't use this identity anymore. He casually threw the box in his arms on his body and sighed. He was discovered when he sneaked in, and after hiding for so long, all his efforts were in vain. But it was enough to gather so much information. He didn't expect that he would be able to gather so much crucial information from a casual change at the beginning. As he sighed, cracking sounds came from his body. Like yellow soil under the scorching sun, layers of cracks appeared. The people beside him were already prepared. A palm-sized box opened, and a few of them took out a large piece of crystal-clear ointment. They quickly tore off his clothes and smeared it all over his body. Under the secret healing ointment, Guyu's broken body was barely restored. But this person looked like he was on the verge of death and was heavily injured. Although the weak sorcerer is useful, there is a limit. The middle-aged man looked down at him. The pleasing frame can give false life, but it can't heal the damage to the soul and the sacred mark. If your sacred mark collapses here, no one can save you. Got it. The weak sorcerer sighed and raised his finger. Do you have a cigarette? I haven't smoked for 3 or 4 days. I'm suffocating. Soon, the cigarette was lit. He was helped up and leaned against the wall. After sorting out his thoughts, he began to report the information he had obtained. Among the ascendants, Ingzhou's lineage had always been known as the chemistry lineage. One of the main reasons for this was that the various stigmata that circulated outside were mostly spirits born from various monsters and items. In other words, they were known as the 99 gods or miracles of chemistry. Most of them were monsters and demons. The rare good ones were fine, but the fatal flaw was that they were congenitally deficient. Although there was no lack of high-level stigmata, there was a lack of communication channels between the gods and the demons at the lower levels. There was an almost monopolistic gap between them. Even if it was guaranteed that those in the upper echelons could always control those in the lower echelons, the temporary convenience could not make up for such a huge flaw, the lack of a powerhouse who could take charge. Even though there were edicts in history that encouraged the integration of gods and Buddhas, a large number of foreign miracles were introduced, and a large number of source books that referenced the Eastern Xia and Indian genealogies, there were still not many paths of ascension that could be taken from the bottom up, apart from the power that the imperial family and the various ministers had secretly reserved. Perhaps due to the influence of the celestial genealogy, Ingzhou was the first to modify and revise the stigmata in the genealogy. Although it created many evil creatures and eroded bodies, the final result was obviously enough to make up for the huge sacrifice. He had extracted the true essence of the chemical genealogy and created several complete paths of sublimation that were collectively known as energy. From the very first day this force was created, it was directly under the control of the imperial court, a secret organization overseen by each generation of law overlords. Through the continuous selection of talents and trial and error, it formed the current Ingzhou's external sublimation organization, Looming Hall. If other stigmata could still be obtained by outsiders, then the energy stigmata was still firmly held in the hands of the Tianjin branch represented by the ministers, relying on it as a sharp weapon against the Wu family faction. Well, it would be even better if a certain wild warrior who was still loafing around in the Social Security Bureau could commit suicide. And now, do you know, the Ingzhou Sublimer was showing a secret advancement from the energy branch, a strange stigmata known as the weak sorcerer. In the original legend, the weak sorcerer was just a pitiful and powerless child, a character who drowned in the Tao after running away from home. Now, after combining many stigmata recreations, he had changed his appearance. After discarding all insignificant abilities, he obtained the ability called Zhuizi. Just like a painted skin, as long as it was a sublimer under the third step, After he personally killed them, he could perfectly disguise them. Their personality, style, and even short-term memories were all flawless. Even when the stigmata's abilities were weakened, they could still be preserved. As long as there wasn't an intense battle, no one would be able to see any flaws. It was by relying on this that he was able to sneak into the Social Security Bureau, change his appearance step by step, and come into contact with the core secrets. Aside from the hidden stake, there are 14 sublimers, all of them at the third step. The stigmata records are all in my pocket. He panted violently. The others have all gone to the Central District. Their speed has increased. If we don't stop them quickly, Yamatai City will completely fall into the hands of the Social Security Bureau. Where do they get this ability? The middle-aged man frowned. The rookie competition is limited to the third step. A third-step sublimer can't break through the Central District's core blockade. At best, they can only rely on the rookie competition to gain an advantage, but they can't completely take it down. I don't know, but they have a trump card. It's at the bottom of the Mitsukoshi building. The weak wizard shook his head. For such a long time, they have been preparing a border relic. It seems like they are smelting and reassembling it. After the 3 scholars went in, it didn't come out at all. I prepared for a few days, but as soon as I revealed the slightest intention of spying, I was suspected. But according to my guess, it won't be long before that border relic is completely assembled. At that time, I'm afraid that we won't have any chance to stop the Eastern Summer lineage. These days, he could feel the terrifying origin substance fluctuations coming from underground every day. However, this enormous power was firmly suppressed by Yi Shuya's army. Not even the slightest bit leaked out. He didn't know what that thing was, but without a doubt, it had the ability to determine victory or defeat. He had to seize it or simply destroy it. We need to hurry up. The middle-aged man's expression became unsightly. The Mountain Maiden mask appeared on his face. He turned around to look at the person beside him. Is there any news from the Kunlun 8 Immortals? The subordinate shook his head. It's hard to break through the Shin-UF framework seal in a short period of time. Communication with the outside world has always been intermittent, but last time he said that he was already prepared. As long as... Before he could finish speaking, his expression froze. The mask involuntarily appeared on his face. The sinister Yiksha's demonic face constantly changed, and a crack actually appeared on it. Behind him, a formless vortex formed from interweaving clouds slowly spread out. In an instant, a crack appeared in the Shin-UF framework seal. However, this crack was too small, and only a single strand of origin substance could pass through. The Mountain Maiden was overjoyed. She glanced at the subordinates beside her and waved her hand. 2 people immediately threw themselves into the vortex, becoming a part of it. Thunder rumbled as the vortex expanded. The origin substance that had emerged from the vortex could be described as an ocean. It descended from the sky like a waterfall, pouring into the Yiksha's face. The ascendant knelt on the ground and howled, unable to endure the enormous power, until a fierce light flashed through the vortex, and a streak of lightning shot into his body. The Yiksha suddenly exploded into a bloody mist. Immediately afterwards, the bloody mist shrank, forming a mangled human figure. As the vortex gradually dissipated, the figure kneeling on the ground raised his face. The pitch-black wings on his back slowly spread open, shaking off the blood. Lord Shizhou, all of the ascendants present knelt to welcome him. In just a few short seconds, with the infusion of power from outside the vortex and the Yiksha's stigmata as a coordinate, the powerhouse from Seat had already broken through the Shin-UF framework seal, descending into this ancient city. A pair of wooden clogs stepped on the rooftop, a pure white monk's robes flapping in the wind. The newcomer raised his bird-like mask and spoke in a low voice. His words made everyone present go wild with joy. Now that I have abandoned my previous surname, you can just call me Heaven City Square. The support was even more exaggerated than expected. The Immortal Island lineage had spared no expense to send a complete 4th Order Ascendant into Yamatai City. The one who had arrived was no longer the 3rd Order Yiksha Stoneboat, but a 4th Order Ascendant, a walking legend. Crow Tengu. Under the gaze of that pair of eyes, the entire city was instantly seen through. Sensing the presence not far away, the ascendant who called himself Sky City Square raised his eyebrows. Yi Shuya. He sighed softly. No wonder the minister of the left is so nervous. That woman is indeed not an easy opponent. Just as well, let me get rid of my depression. As an ascendant who was also active in the borders, Yiksha Stoneboat had won a lot of fame and could be said to have achieved a lot in battle. However, he had always been suppressed by that fox girl called Yi Shuya. For many years, there was not a day that he did not think of wiping away his shame. The funny thing was that he, who was suppressed, was the first to complete the fusion of his soul and stigmata, breaking through to become Crow Tengu. Yi Shuya, on the other hand, was unable to advance because of the incompatibility between her soul and stigmata. She could be said to be the strongest in Eastern Xia, but she was stuck at the last step, even if there was only a difference of one number between the third order and the fourth order. However, the difference in quality between ether and star seed was more than that of clouds and mud. The difference couldn't be measured. However, after seeing that their opponent was Yi Shuya, Sky City Square was still extremely alert. After all, she was once a strong opponent. Moreover, in the Legends of the Borders, that woman had a battle record of defeating a fourth-order ascendant. Even if it was just a legend without any basis, it still proved the extent of Yi Shuya's ferocity. Otherwise, how could she be elected as the number one in the new generation of Eastern Xia lineage? He had to go all out and quickly settle this. It wasn't just for victory, but also to show respect to this strong opponent of his. From his hand, a crimson-red bow slowly appeared. The moment it appeared, everyone present felt a piercing pain in their eyes. They were shocked by the pure divinity in it and couldn't stand steadily. Chapter 265. Hachibana Bow. Mountain Granny cried out in surprise, and then she was overjoyed. She didn't expect Crow Tengu to be carrying this weapon that had been worshipped in the Hachibana shrine for hundreds of years. After such a long time of worship, this border relic, which was transformed from the divine mark of the former dragon god, had been endowed with divinity, and its destructive power against the divine mark could be described as terrifying. Damn it, there are no more dragons in this world. Crow Tengu raised the Hachibana bow in his hand and couldn't help but sigh softly. His tone was filled with helplessness and anger. Yes, there are no more dragons in this world. Ever since the Eastern Summer genealogy completed the heavenly passage, all divinity related to the dragons of Eastern Summer had been completely cut off. But apart from Eastern Summer, how many dragons in the various realms, borders, and hells had divinity? With the support of the American genealogy and the fact that it had nothing to do with Eastern Summer, the feathered serpent god didn't even lose a single hair. But apart from that, it was almost a catastrophe. Whether it was the winged dragon, the yellow dragon, the azure dragon, the white dragon, or even the dragon gods worshipped by the four seas, their divinity disappeared overnight. This included the many dragon gods of Yingzhou, who had been demoted in a single night and reduced to serpents. Many river masters had disappeared in a single night, and those who survived had either changed their masters in time or were struggling at death's door. This Hachibana bow went from a true divine weapon to a border relic with some divinity. Who knew how many dragon gods and the divinity that they had cultivated for so many years were swept away? With such a sudden catastrophe, how could the Yingzhou genealogy explain themselves? Back then, the Eastern Summer genealogy's attitude was resolute, decisive, and terrifying. No one could stop them. Don't try to stop them. Whoever tried to stop them would die. 70 years of preparation had been completed in an instant, just like a raging fire sweeping through the wind. After that, even the Astronomical Society couldn't interfere with the Eastern Summer genealogy's family affairs. If you asked why, weren't the dragon gods worshipped in Yingzhou, Myanmar, and all the other regions of Asia radiated from the Origin Codex of Eastern Summer? Back then, when the Origin Codex was opened, they didn't reject it. Now that it's not open, they're getting angry? Where did this logic come from? After so many years of sacrifice and nurturing, the golden threads that had been accumulated year after year had now become someone else's wedding dress. The entire nation had worked hard for 100 years to help the Eastern Xia dynasty complete an earth-shattering undertaking. Heavenly Terminus. Apart from the dragon god's divinity harvested from all over the world, the Xia Empire had also invested an astonishing amount of capital. Not only had they given up on several paths of ascension that could allow them to become their natural enemy, even the previous Torch Dragon had given up on his divine side and turned into the Torch Dragon. In the end, the enormous divinity, stigmata, and power that were enough to create a living god didn't fall into anyone's hands. Instead, they turned into real dragon veins that ran through the country and radiated to the entire border of Xia. From that moment onwards, there were no more true dragons in the world. This power had been given to every inch of land and member of the Eastern Xia kingdom without holding back. It was from that year onwards that the Eastern Xia lineage ushered in its current golden era. It wasn't just the ascension of 14 level 5 experts, the expansion of countless hells, and the appearance of 16 large-scale borders. Even before the previous natural enemy had passed away, the new natural enemy, Chu Hai, had already been born. In those short 10 years, the Eastern Xia lineage actually had 2 natural enemies that it had never had before. It completely suppressed the Russian Federation lineage and competed with the Roman lineage for the #1 position in the world, becoming the undisputed overlord of the present world. When the outpouring of talents temporarily stopped, everyone thought that the Eastern Xia lineage, which had nearly doubled in size, would temporarily rest and recuperate. However, right after that, the White Emperor's son, who had been crowned at the age of 12, appeared. In addition, there was a terrifying foundation that couldn't be seen, and there were all sorts of new talents that constantly rose to prominence over the years. Decline after the peak? Decline my ass. In this world, there was only the principle of the strong becoming stronger and the weak becoming weaker. If not for this, how could the 8 banners bow, which had once destroyed the fan of 6 armies from 100 miles away and cut off the lifeline of the Ping family, and decide the future of Yingzhou for the next 1,000 years? Weakened to such an extent? Just thinking about this, Tian Chengfang's hatred burned fiercely in his heart. Immediately, he noticed the source of this crazy hatred, the longbow in his hand. Sensing the existence of the divine mark of the Eastern Xia lineage, this longbow was so angry that it could no longer hold back. Very good, very good. With your help, this battle is settled. Tian Chengfang happily absorbed the hatred into his chest. Then, a small and heavy metal mallet appeared in his chest. Just by shaking it, countless lightning bolts burst out of the mallet, which stung people's eyes. This was the miracle that was forged after combining his own soul, the divine mark of Crow Tengu. Nama Hachiman, please help me achieve this martial arts fate. He laughed loudly and opened his arms, set off an earth-shattering thunder. At this moment, as the divine mark of Crow Tengu and the Hachiman Bao formed a link through the source form, the 2 completely different miracles merged in his hand as if they were from the same source. In the end, only a brilliance that was too bright to be seen by the naked eye was left. It seemed to be a longsword. The style was simple and elegant, but the shape constantly changed between the light of fire and lightning. In the end, it formed a loud noise that seemed to tear the sky and earth apart. After combining the Hachiman Bao and the divine mark of Crow Tengu with the supreme secret of the lineage, this divinity was released in the most intense way possible, forming a genuine miracle. Miracle mark, Imperial Thunder Construction, or what could be called the Ten Grasp Sword. At this moment, as the Ten Grasp Sword was raised and slashed down, a gust of wind rose and whistled. Then, from afar, a thunderbolt lashed down, and a terrifying pillar of fire rose from the ground, engulfing everything. There was no need for Heaven City Square to activate or infuse it. The miraculous carvings automatically extracted the free origin substance from Yamatai City, continuously releasing this destructive energy. The moment the fire rose, Every pair of startled eyes were illuminated by the tyrannical light. At that moment, the war began. "All of you, hold the line for me." Crow Tengu spread his wings, holding the ten-grass sword in his hand, and soared into the sky, charging straight for Ginza. In an instant, he crossed a long distance and arrived in the sky above the Mitsukoshi building. High up in the sky, he looked down. The ten-grassed sword slashed down. Another pillar of fire rose, followed by a third and a fourth. In the instant that the four pillars of fire soared into the sky, the entire Ginza was sealed by that terrifying heat. This was already not a power that a sublimator could compare to, but a genuine miracle. The power of the past gods was engraved in history, and now it appeared in this place. The power of the miracle mark brought about complete destruction, tearing apart the outer defenses like crushing dry weeds and smashing rotten wood. Then it slashed down towards the Mitsukoshi building, which was shrouded in layers of dense fog. Miracle mark, huh? It's hard to deal with. In that instant, Yi Shuya raised his eyebrows. Amidst the terrifying flames that descended from the sky and rose from the ground, he raised a finger and waved it horizontally. Countless dense fog suddenly enveloped Ginza and then quickly dissipated. The entire Mitsukoshi building had already disappeared without a trace. Then, following the flicking of Yishuya's 10 fingers, countless traces that were hard to distinguish with the naked eye flew out in a crisscross pattern, enveloping the entire Ginza area. With the support of the Green Hill Army, she was able to obtain a nearly endless source of origin substance for herself to squander. In an instant, the entire Ginza turned into an illusion. Then the soul ability was activated. Farewell. After a long period of brewing and change, the soul ability that was almost on the verge of a metamorphosis revealed a terrifying power here. Following the drawing of her fingers in the air, countless white lines like spider silk crisscrossed in the sky above Ginza. They were so thin that they were hard to notice, but they were so straight that not even a millimeter of error existed. Then, the Ginza parted. Yishuya's soul ability was very simple. It was only to separate two things, as if the two things had never been together. But such a pure effect applied on such a huge scale, it formed a terrifying change. The entire Ginza was cut into pieces by the crisscrossing white lines, and then chaotically pieced together by the Heart Moon Fox's illusion. Front, back, left, right, up, down, all directions lost their meaning, and there was no difference between inside and outside. The tyrannical flames of the 10 grasped swords fell from the sky, but following Crow Tengu's slash, it sprayed out from the right side of the Ginza, sweeping across, burning all the tall buildings in the distance to ashes. Futile, Crow Tengu sneered. This is not like you. Yi Shuya, how long can you hide? How long can the Green Hills illusion last? How long can your ability last? Who knows? Maybe it's longer than you can support the miracle engraving. Yi Shuya revealed the side of her face from the countless shattered mirrors. She smiled resplendently. This is called defending and waiting for reinforcements. A good woman like me can advance and retreat. Wait until the Astronomy Association reinforcements I call for arrive. I'll immediately come out and kill you. Ridiculous! Sky City Square sneered. It would be strange if the Astronomy Association interfered in the struggle between the Eastern Summer and the Ing continent. But for some reason, when she said this, Sky City Square felt a faint uneasiness in his heart. Perhaps it was the shadow of the past, or perhaps it was just a simple premonition. In the midst of the fierce attack, he suddenly waved his hand and ordered the other looming hall subordinates. I will hold off that woman and send you in. Next, you just need to find the thing hidden at the bottom. Don't worry about anything else. Mountain Maiden nodded. It was time to go all out. The ascendants that had been temporarily recruited from Sodom and Run Shatong's teams, in addition to all the members of the looming hall, a total of more than 40 ascendants instantly gathered in one place. Immediately afterwards, the mountain elder pulled out a large stick from behind her back and infused it with origin substance. A chilling, solemn aura began to rise from the stick. Immediately afterwards, a line of pitch-black words appeared on the body of the stick. Unfortunately, because it had been so long, Only the three words "Soul of the Navy" could be seen. The rest could not be seen clearly. This was the most precious border relic that the looming hall had obtained from this operation. However, its ability was not to kill enemies, but to strengthen their own people. As the large stick was raised, the person in the front took off his jacket. Mountain Maiden took a deep breath and yelled, "Origin!" The large stick fell. The ascendants' faces instantly turned ashen. Immediately after, their bodies began to swell, as if they had really been injected with their origin and courage. Origin's substance fluctuations overflowed from their bodies, and the power of the sacred mark became unprecedentedly active. After one, there was a second. After injecting 10 or so people with their origin, Mountain Maiden collapsed to the ground, exhausted. Naturally, there were others who came over to continue her work. In just a few minutes, all of the ascendants had received the injection of their origin. After knowing shame, they became even more courageous. It was as if they had eaten an all-nourishing pill. Their faces were all flushed red, and they could not wait to throw themselves into the battlefield. Preparations were complete. Sky City Square nodded. The tin grass sword in his hand suddenly retracted all of its light and slashed forward. It was an exquisite sword technique secretly passed down from the Heavenly Dog's sacred mark. The Heavenly Dog had won. Immediately after, an illusion opened. Chapter 266. In the legends, Crow Tengu was more famous for his swordsmanship other than his various strange techniques. 1,000 years ago, there was a saying that Crow Tengu had passed down his swordsmanship to the original meaning scripture. 1,000 years later, the Ingzhou swordsmanship that had been passed down to this day still contained a lot of the essence of Tengu. Although the later generations could not hope to reach the terrifying level of attainment of the founder, there were still secret techniques from the new dark school. The 6 secret techniques that came from the same source as Crow Tengu were known as Tengu Sheng and could also be recorded as Tengu copied. At this moment, Heaven City Square displayed his most proficient technique of the 6 techniques, the Thunder Continuing Blade. After accumulating power for a moment, the 10 swords swept past. The illusion of Green Hill shook, the fog suddenly dissipating, revealing the silver platform that intersected into a maze. After a long time, a line of slash appeared in the air along with a burst of electricity. The Thunder Continuing Blade was known for its lightning-fast speed. Even though its destructive power wasn't as great as Swallow Flight or Tengu's profundity, a single slash of the blade could cut off a wisp of light from an illusory illusion, turning reality into illusion, and vice versa. It was specifically designed to counter large-scale origin substances like illusions. Ever since he became Crow Tengu, Heaven City Square had been practicing this technique day and night. It cannot be that he did not have the intention to one day be able to hold his head high against Yishuya. At this moment, with the 10 swords in his hand, one part of its power could be increased to 100%. The illusion that had been created with the help of the Green Hill Army for several days was actually cut open by his sword. Without needing Heaven City Square's orders, the sublimators who had been infused with their roots let out a scream. Their blood rushed to their heads, and they charged in without a care for their own safety. Yishuya, this woman, was very mysterious. After experiencing so many battles at the border, she had never revealed her trump card. She hid her methods very well. Everyone who had seen her was already dead. Heaven City Square was not willing to take any risks. A 4th level against a 3rd level, and with the divine mark in his hand, the situation was in his favor. He had the intention to fight steadily and surely, using the big picture to break through the small situation. It was a good opportunity to let this group of people see what other methods Yishuya had. So cowardly? Yishuya's light laughter came from the broken silver throne. Even if you've advanced to the 4th step, you still haven't made any progress. Men have to be a bit braver. Only then will they have good luck with women. For a guy like you who doesn't know how to enjoy life, is it Crow Tengu or Turtle Prime Minister? Tian Chengfang's expression did not change. He stepped forward and slashed down with his sword again. Boom! The pillar of fire swept across, and the surging heat quickly condensed in the air, turning into a thin line. It passed through the countless parting trajectories and then exploded with a loud bang. As a result, the heat wave engulfed the entire Ginza, and a narrow street was turned into ashes in an instant. The Mitsukoshi building hidden in the deepest part of the maze was revealed in an instant. The sublimators who rushed in seized the opportunity. "Follow me." In the midst of the chaos, one of the looming hall's ascenders suddenly shouted. Immediately after, he raised his flushed face and clenched his fists. A gust of evil wind rose out of nowhere and swept the group of people away without a trace. Only the grayish-black rainwater randomly splashed in all directions. In an instant, after passing through layers and layers of obstacles, they appeared again. They were already floating in the broken sky, very close to the side of the Mitsukoshi building. Immediately after, in midair, the sublimator with a flushed face discovered that his body had been cut in half at some point. He opened his mouth to say something, but the Ingzhou chemical genealogy stigmata train cracked open a crack. His whole body suddenly exploded into a mass of blood rain, randomly splashing in all directions. The border relic root infusion rod that Mountain Elder took out, after being blessed by the root, could temporarily increase the sublimator's battle power to an inconceivable level, almost doubling it for up to an hour. But the disadvantage was that after an hour, the sublimator would immediately lose the strength to truss a chicken. And because the strength was too inflated, there would be a debuff called Divine Wind. Once heavily injured, the sublimator would immediately self-destruct. Although the buff was strong, it was very evil. It could only be said that the soul of the Navy was really not a good thing. Since they were only one step away from the Mitsukoshi building, it was naturally not a problem for the sublimators. In the blink of an eye, more than a dozen sublimators with flushed faces had already smashed through the glass and rushed in. Immediately after, they saw an iron pillar that was even more exaggerated than the root infusion rod sweeping over. The wind whistled and the sound of explosions rang out. The person at the front exploded on the spot, bursting into blazing flames like a bomb. The iron pillar was melted by the sublimator's self-destruction before he died. The sublimator that originally swung the iron pillar flew backwards and was barely supported by his teammates. "Are you okay?" Shinyu asked while gasping for breath. "I'm fine even if you're not." Guanhai's red phoenix eyes widened. He supported himself against the wall and crawled up. The muscles all over his body swelled up again. He pointed at his head and said, 200 people's shift isn't enough. Give me 200 more. You've been strengthened. Hurry up and send it." Shinyu didn't say anything and slapped him on the back. Guanhai suddenly swelled up again. Blood was about to seep out of his pores, and his whole body was burning red. Immediately after, Shinyu's 10 fingers tapped together. After using up all the buffs on his teammates, he shrank to the back and raised his gun to cover for them. After volunteering for a long period of training, he was no longer as weak as before. He really relied on himself to find a place in the action team. If Jin Mu could see this day, he would probably be happy for him, right? A roar came from outside the building again. Time was of the essence. Whether it was the sublimators that had been injected with the soul of the Navy or the Social Security Bureau members who were working overtime, they all felt a burst of pressure. They all sped up at the same time, and the entire building that had been cut into a maze began to shake. If it wasn't an abyss building that had been assimilated by hell, it probably wouldn't have been able to support such a fierce battle between dozens of sublimators. No, it might have already collapsed in the battle between Moonfox and Crow Tengu in the outside world. Hoarse laughter sounded like an owl, spreading above the sky. The gray and black wings spread out. Tian Chungfong held the seal of miracles in his hand and used the external force of swordsmanship to instantly recover his chi. Like wind and fire, he slashed twice in a row. The two people's secret swords crisscrossed, forming a huge flame cross, pressing down from the sky. Like a hot knife through butter. The green hill illusion that was barely mending was instantly shattered. Countless silver tracks cut by other principals collapsed under the slash of the 10-grasped sword. The entire Ginza was instantly lowered by several meters. It was as if it was hit by an infinite force like a nail by 3 inches in an instant. The outer layer of the building collapsed. In the roar, dust flew out. The 10-grasped sword slashed down again. A tragic crack appeared on Yi Shui's upper body. The light of flames appeared on the scar, penetrating deep into the bone marrow. Even if the change didn't damage the sacred mark in time, a silhouette of the Mitsukoshi building that was hidden in the fog finally emerged. "What's going on?" Tian Chung Fong laughed mockingly. "Yi Shui, it's rare to see you in such a sorry state." Yi Shui's expression didn't change. He only raised his eyes to look at the enemy in the sky and sighed softly. "Tengu, there are similar names in the 28 constellations, but they're not the same thing." The 10-grasped sword slashed down. In an instant, a mournful slash mark appeared on the Mitsukoshi building. But immediately after, a white light that made Tian Chung Fong's heart palpitate shot out from the building. It quietly swept past. Wherever it passed, all the Yingzhou sublimators that rushed and lost their voices, as if they were erased. Then he disappeared, dead, just like the scene that Huaisher saw on the first night when he broke into Yamatai City. Wherever the white light passed, whether it was the sublimators of the Social Security Bureau or the invading Yingzhou people, they all turned into ashes. Among all the dark gold items, it was the only dark gold item with a limited number of uses. A simple and crude attack. Everyone who was hit by the white light would die, including the user himself. Tian Chung Fong sucked in a breath of cold air. Soon after, his back couldn't help but break out in cold sweat. Scared, he didn't think that as a 4th-stage sublimator with divinity, he would be instantly killed by the white light. But what was more troublesome was that if he was really hit by the white light, the rules of the pleasing frame would undoubtedly be imposed on him. At that time, he would be like a reptile that fell into a spider's web, waiting for the giant goose group to play with him. When he thought of how he almost rushed in, he felt a burst of fear. This female fox actually hid such a sinister trap. She was indeed his greatest enemy. He couldn't underestimate her purely because of her rank. Seeing that the trap that he had prepared for so long, Tian Chung Fong actually didn't hit, Yi Shui couldn't help but feel regretful. This is going to be difficult. Heart Moon Fox was the best at positional warfare, especially this kind of defensive counterattack. As long as Tian Chung Fong entered the silver base, there would still be a fight. But now, he was relying on the miracle engraving outside to slowly wear down his positional advantage. Just like a high wall facing the constant bombardment of mortars, there would always be a time when it couldn't hold on. Moreover, for a Tier 3 to fight a Tier 4, the win rate was already so low that it could be ranked first in Eastern Summer. Now that Sky City Square was so cautious, there was no hope of turning the situation around. Yi Shui frowned. He waved his hand and took out an old hanging picture. He shook it twice and threw out 3 huge monkeys that were unknown whether they were baboons or old apes. The 3 old monkeys rolled on the ground, scratching their ears and cheeks. These 3 were border mutants hired by the Mitsukoshi building. One was called Don't Speak, one was called Don't Listen, and one was called Don't See. But now, this was called Looking Fiercely Without Looking, Crazily Listening Without Listening, and chattering nonstop from the moment he landed on the ground. "Missy, why did you call us here? Have you changed into new clothes? The clothes are nice, but the hairstyle doesn't match you. Your face is a little pale, and you don't seem to be in a good mood. Your expression is so solemn. You'll have wrinkles on your head when you're old. Hey, why aren't you saying anything? Are you feeling unwell? If you're feeling unwell, then hurry and find a doctor. Don't just stand here and waste time. Speaking of which, why did you call us out? Is there an enemy? I've already told you to be kind to others, to be merciful. Otherwise, if revenge breeds revenge, when will there ever be an end? Let me see where the enemy is. Fuck a divine mark. We're a Tier 4. Why didn't you say so earlier? We can't beat them at all. What I want to say is, did you give me a chance?" Yi Shui glanced at him and shook her head. "I know you guys can't beat them. Don't worry about me. sending you to your deaths. Then why did you call us out? Don't say it was hard to understand. Just as he was about to chatter nonstop, he saw Yi Shui's gradually ice-cold smile. Just to let you guys see. She raised her eyes and stared at the direction of the sky. When necessary, lend a hand. This is called being prepared for nothing. The rumbling sound rose again. Chapter 267. With a cold snort, Crow Tengu raised his sword again. A pillar of fire fell from the sky, piercing through the silver throne. It burned a hole in the middle of several buildings, separating them from the Green Mountain's illusory realm. With a cry, a small fox staggered out of the void. The fur on its upper body was scorched. It leaned on her leg and softly whimpered. Okay, I got it. Yi Shui picked it up and gently stroked it. Tell everyone there's no need to hold on. I'll bring up the rear. Retreat immediately. Granny Sue won't blame us. The small fox stuck out its tongue and gently licked her finger. It jumped down and limped a few steps before turning back to look at her. It wanted to go with her, but only saw Yi Shui wave her hand and smile. I'll go in a bit. Don't worry. The small fox whimpered and silently disappeared. Immediately after, following the retreat of the Green Mountain's army, the fog that enveloped the silver throne quickly dissipated. Piece by piece, the illusory realm dissipated. At that moment, inside the building, the mountain elder finally broke through the layers of illusion and broke into the core of the underground secret room. He felt the violent fluctuations of origin substance and was immediately overjoyed. Lord Sky City Square, I found it. He impatiently rushed into the basement. It's here. As if he could empathize with the joy of, I've touched it. Heaven City Square suddenly let out a long laugh. In an instant, his pitch-black wings folded up, and his entire body merged into the flames of the ten-grasped sword. With a sudden slash, he forcibly tore through Yi Shui's illusion and rushed into the silver throne. He aimed at the mountain elder's coordinates and threw himself in, straight into the core. Immediately after, he saw the mountain elder's body split into pieces. It was as if he had been hit by a huge force. His entire body turned into blood and was crushed into mud. It was evenly spread across the wall in front of him. It was impossible to dig it out. However, in the excessively large basement, there were no traces of any border relics. There were only broken pieces of metal on the ground that carried faint fluctuations of origin substance. It was as if they were remnants left after being completely devoured. In between the pieces of metal stood a young man. He held an iron rod in his hand and was excitedly poking at the pile of meat on the wall. When he heard the noise, he turned around. A curious expression appeared on his handsome face, and his voice was gentle. May I ask what advice this friend has for me? Tiancheng Square stared at him in astonishment and frowned. Just like Yi Shuia, he was a third-tier sublimation realm cultivator. His origin substance was well contained and not scattered at all. He was already at the peak of the third-tier sublimation realm, but he was still far from Su Chen's level. What surprised him was not the presence of the other party, but the fact that there was nothing here. There was nothing. He could not see any trump cards of the legendary Middle Xiao lineage. It was just like an abandoned storage room. There was no ghost shadow of any relics of the border. When the young man saw that he didn't answer, he continued to say gently, If this friend is lost, I have a map here. Feel free to take it. Heaven City Square frowned and didn't say anything. The young man waited for a moment, but he didn't get a reply. He couldn't help but sigh. Hey, old Moo, I'm asking you a question. Didn't you hear me? He abruptly swung the iron rod in his hand, causing a loud rumbling sound, and smashed it down toward his head. The sudden change made him seem like a completely different person. An incredible fierceness burst out from his gentleness. It was as if he had torn off his human disguise in an instant. The ruthless malice wrapped around the iron rod and burst out a shrill sound. Even Tiancheng Square didn't have time to react to the speed of the iron rod. It hit Tiancheng Square's head in a straight line, causing him to black out and involuntarily take a step back. Then, the young man swung the iron rod again and smashed it down. His small mouth seemed to be smeared with honey. I'm so tired. I just swore that I wouldn't swear, but you're forcing me to break my vow. Damn you. Your mother worked so hard to raise you, but you don't even know how to speak." A series of warm greetings mixed with a thick dialect came rushing at Tian Chung Square. Tian Chung Square was furious. He raised his sword and slashed it down. The young man was forced to retreat. However, behind the young man, countless rays of starlight suddenly appeared. They faintly intertwined into the shadow of a ferocious ape. The iron rod in his hand was instantly covered in frost, and the coldness was threatening. Eastern Summer Genealogy, 3rd rank Sacred Mark, Ginseng Water Ape. Then, Yi Shuya's helpless sigh came from behind him. "I was already preparing to run. Why did you rush in?" Deliberately mystifying things. Tian Chung Square sneered. His sword swept across and suddenly tore apart layers of walls. In almost an instant, the entire Mitsukoshi building was torn apart. After entering, he realized that the Mitsukoshi building was most likely a trap set by the Social Security Bureau for the looming haul. However, a mere trap could trap other people, but could it trap a 4th-rank ascendant with a miracle engraved on his hand? "You're still too arrogant." Yi Shuya waved her hand, casually parting the heat wave that hit her in the face. She shook her head and sighed. "If it was you in the past, you would have turned around and run." She raised her leg and kicked the monkeys beside her toward Heaven City Square. "Damn monkeys, get to work." Don't hear, don't see, and don't speak. The 3 old apes helplessly screamed and instantly disappeared in the wind. Then, they reappeared around Tian Chung Square. 1 monkey covered his eyes, 1 monkey covered his ears, and 1 monkey blocked his mouth. The 3 border mutants from the depths of hell instantly sealed his eyes, mouth, nose, and all 6 senses. Then they began to paddle. He couldn't beat them, so he could only kill time. Being able to block them for a while was already doing his best. The 3 of them only treated him as a weak and powerless old monkey that could still eat. They were extremely slippery. If they could rub against him, they wouldn't enter. In a short gap, Yishuya raised her eyes and looked at the young man beside her. "Sun Fong, what about the things I gave you? Have you finished eating?" "I've finished eating." Sun Fong pointed at the iron scraps on the ground. "Over 20 border relics. Not a single one is left. It's rare to be so full." "That's true. After all, you relied on equipment to reach the peak of the 3rd rank." Yi Shuya nodded and asked again, "Then what are you waiting for? Are you waiting for me to send you off?" "No, cough. Sun Fong hesitated for a moment. He didn't have the domineering aura that he had when he swung his iron rod at people. After a while, he asked with a red face, "I say, little Shui, we've known each other for so many years. You see, I can be considered an acquaintance. How about after this mission, you consider it?" "I won't." Yi Shuya shook her head and flatly refused. Sun Fong was stunned for a moment. "Why? Talking about feelings while working, planting a flag when saying goodbye, not speaking clearly when confessing. You have all 3 of the things I hate the most. We're not suitable." Yi Shuya shook her head and straightforwardly said, "At most, I'll treat you to a meal when we get back." "That's fine." Sun Fong bitterly laughed, a trace of hope rising in his heart. "I know a pretty good place. Bring everyone along." Yi Shuya didn't wait for him to finish speaking and added another sentence, completely cutting off his little thoughts. Then he took his dog life. "Yes, kill a single dog." With a wave of his hand, Sun Fong's head fell to the ground. But following Sun Fong's death, his corpse didn't disappear. Instead, a resplendent light, like a star, slowly rose from within. Following Yi Shuya's pull, it fell in her hands. When Sky City Square finally got rid of those 3 damned monkeys, this was the scene she saw when she opened her eyes. "Oh, you're awake?" Yi Shuya grinned, revealing a slight smile. "Unfortunately, it's too late." Then, she held the divine mark, which was as bright as a star, and stabbed it into her chest. A rumbling sound erupted. Origin's substance that had accumulated to a terrifying extent swept out from her body, spreading in all directions. Finally, it soared into the sky, tearing apart gloomy clouds and stirring up a frenzied hurricane. In front of Sky City Square, she implanted the divine mark of the Three Rivers ape into her own body. She was courting death. No one's body could contain two different divine marks at the same time. Even if they came from the same source, it was impossible. Even if they were conjoined people, it was impossible. And in the instant that the Three Rivers ape's divine mark entered her body, the Heart Moon Fox's divine mark also awakened. Under the inexhaustible origin substance fluctuations, the two perfect divine marks sensed each other from their slender bodies. Immediately after, they flew into a rage. They each turned into a projection of stars, colliding with each other. The glorious light of the collapse of stars lit up in her eyes. So blazing. Sky City Square sneered, preparing to enjoy the scene of Yi Shuiya's body exploding and her soul shattering. But immediately after, he saw countless brilliant and pure starlight rise from Yi Shuiya's body. Under the illumination of the starlight, Yi Shuiya's long hair fluttered in the air. The boundless origin substance fluctuations suddenly contracted, forming two completely different silhouettes from her chest. Sky City Square opened his eyes wide in disbelief. Those were two completely different divine marks. No, at this moment, the Shang residence formed by the Heart Moon Fox and the Ginseng residence formed by the Three Rivers ape, the two divine marks actually had some kind of connection. They completely dissipated, merging into Yi Shuiya's soul, becoming a part of her. We don't meet in life. Moving is like participating in business. Facing Crow Tengu's shocked gaze, Yi Shuiya grinned, extremely handsome. Who said participating in business doesn't meet? In that instant, the transformed soul awakened from the light of the stars. In the overlapping starlight of the 7 mansions of the Azure Dragon and the 7 mansions of the White Tiger, all the origin substance accumulated over a long period of time was completely digested in an instant. From behind Yi Shuiya, countless stars rotated. With the push of a huge force, new divine marks constantly flashed from the constantly changing constellation, fleeting and disappearing. It was like a madly spinning roulette, jumping without any pattern. It was unknown where the needle would land in the end. In a trance, there seemed to be a gentle melody in the distance, causing Yi Shuiya's heart to rise with a trace of understanding. "Come, let us see your luck." She casually raised her hand, casually picking out her own fate from the numerous and complicated constellations. She picked out the final result from the countless constantly changing constellations, causing the madly changing nebula to instantly solidify and freeze. The roulette stopped. Immediately after, the cold and distant starlight illuminated her eyes. So cold, so mocking. "Come, your luck isn't too good." Yi Shuiya smiled, raising her hand, revealing 7 rays of starlight that were as brilliant as the scorching sun. Eastern Summer System, 4th Order, Big Dipper. Chapter 268. What did it mean to turn an old hen into a duck in the blink of an eye? That was it. Turning an old hen into a duck might not be accurate, but after the cooked duck flew away, a fresh and spicy T-Rex came out. This made Heaven City Square a little unable to accept this reality. Reality was reality after all. Even if he could not accept it, he had to accept it. Or rather, although he was very unwilling to admit it, he almost immediately accepted this result. Then he turned around and left. There was a saying in the art of war, retreating was not shameful. Although the original words did not mean this, but the Book of Five Wheels wrote it clearly. Knowing that there's a problem and still rushing forward. That is not war. That is delivering food. Even the Yaksha stone boat of the past never fought a battle that they were not confident in. In the blink of an eye, the other side had advanced. What kind of logic was this? Everything that happened in front of him was really too mysterious. He did not know whether it should be said that he was naturally cautious or that the shadow left by Yi Shuiya in the past was too great. At this moment, even if Heaven City Square had a divine mark in his hand, he did not have the slightest intention of determining victory or defeat. He could be said to be moving like the wind. He spread his wings and flapped twice to escape. Then he discovered that it was too late. Following the completion of Yi Shuya's advancement, the dark clouds above the silver base had already been cut apart by the fierce starlight, disappearing without a trace. Replacing it was the hanging Big Dipper, sprinkling down cold light like iron. Is the Eastern Summer genealogy determined to eat us? Heaven City Square turned his head and coldly stared at Yi Shuya. He could not help but sneer. You call yourself a great country in vain. In the end, in order to fight over this hell, you did not hesitate to use such sneaky methods. Until now, how could he not know the Eastern Summer genealogy's plan? Even if he did not come, the trap here was most likely prepared for the looming haul. It could be imagined that when the incontinent genealogy people broke in here with great difficulty and wanted to thwart the Social Security Bureau's plan, they would find in despair that there was a perfect third-step great perfection here. Then, after using all their cards, they would welcome Yi Shuya with cheats. After limiting the entrance rules, she was the only fourth step in the competition. At that time, whether Yamatai City was chaotic or not, would it not be up to her to decide? Speaking of despicable words, shouldn't it be the same? When Yi Shuya heard this, he immediately ridiculed. I didn't ask you to send him. Moreover, the rules of the competition are here. Everyone is standing on the same starting line. The person who broke the rules and sent a tear for it is not us. You still have the face to say that others are despicable. These words sounded dignified, but every word was filled with the desire to eat people. Crowface of Heaven City Square rolled his red eyes and sneered angrily. I am a barbarian. No matter how incompetent and immoral those Huam ministers were, they had been strictly educated since they were little. Therefore, he directly quoted an ancient saying from an ancient book of Eastern Xia dynasty. It was unknown whether this was a reply to Yi Shuya or a mockery of the Eastern Summer lineage. 35 years later, Chu Fazhui. Suiyu said, I am not guilty. Chu said, I am a barbarian. If you want to pin a crime on someone, why worry about finding a pretext? On the surface, there was glory and integrity, but in the dark, who was cleaner than who? Well said. Yi Shuya applauded and praised. Only today did I discover that Shi Zhou, you are a guy with a backbone. Even if you talk about the heavens, it is still not as big as the fist. I actually prefer another way of saying it. She paused for a moment, then seriously said, in esports, noobs are the original sin. In that instant, the Big Dipper hung high in the sky. Cold starlight burst forth from Yi Shuya's fingertips. After fusing with two sacred marks, the power of the Big Dipper was activated. If the past was the parting that separated all living things, then this moment was the participating merchant that was destined to never meet again. The flames of the 10 grasped swords rose sharply, chopping down in a flash. From Yi Shuya's fingertips all the way to the foot of Heaven City Square, a perfectly straight crack silently appeared. That crack, as if it was born like this, slowly spread to the two sides. After sweeping past the location of Heaven City Square, it continued to extend backwards. In a flash, it covered the entire silver throne. A perfectly straight crack silently spread out. A heart-palpitating cold wind gushed out from the crack. But without waiting for the cold wind to sweep across, Heaven City Square had already brazenly launched an attack. Crow Tengu's speed was completely unleashed, supported by the 10 grasped swords' unstoppable fierce might. But for a moment, it was unexpectedly unable to do anything to the newly advanced Yi Shuya. Engraving a miracle consumed a large amount of sacred marks. Even if he did not need to use origin substance, this excessively large amount of divinity was not a weapon that could be casually used by a sublimator. For Yi Shuya, it was still an absolute deterrent. Even if he could not see the originally world-shaking pillar of fire, if he was chopped by this ore that contained endless lightning and fire, he would definitely not have a good ending. Then, it would be best if he did not get chopped. Yi Shuya raised his hand. It was still the participating merchant. Above the vault of heaven, the stars rotated. Light shone down. Between her and Heaven City Square, a boundless repulsive force suddenly appeared. For a moment, No matter how hard Heaven City Square tried, they were unexpectedly unable to close the distance. The Big Dipper, the Cardinal of Destiny. Under the control of the Cardinal, the two had already respectively entered the domain of the Shan constellation and the Ginseng constellation. There was no possibility of them ever meeting again. Heaven City Square roared. Suddenly, he raised his swords with both hands, pointing them towards the sky. The flames were like torches. Chop! A blazing streak of lightning had already crossed the constellations above the vault of heaven, causing the Big Dipper's operation to also enter a momentary standstill. Under the impact of the divinity, a tragic crack was smashed open in the starry sky. Most of the repulsive force dissipated. But immediately afterwards, Yishuya was already very close. He smiled. So cautious. She said, "Don't be afraid. This version of the Big Dipper has been weakened. It's not strong." But her finger had already slid forward along with her words, carrying with it the fate of parting, the parting of 10,000 things. One of Heaven City Square's arms suddenly flew up. However, there were no scars or traces of blood on the arm. It was as if it had been there since birth. Heaven City Square's expression did not change. There was not even the slightest bit of astonishment or alarm. His expression was as cold as iron. He took a step back, leaving a gap for the sword to swing. At this extreme distance, the 10 swords chopped down. Yishuya's figure suddenly became illusory. He allowed the 10 swords to chop through and once again solidified. Real and illusory as one. This was the specialty of the Moon Fox of Heart. There was no reason why it could not be used after advancing. But as the 10 swords passed by, the constellations above the sky became more and more indistinct. Countless stars were on the verge of collapse. The light of the Big Dipper flickered and dimmed. The divine sword that had once beheaded the great snake was not so easy to resist. The destruction of the divinity directly affected the sacred mark. It left a crack on the sacred mark that Yishuya had just advanced. Both sides suffered, but Yishuya did not retreat. She advanced again. Between her 5 fingers, the light of the Big Dipper rose. Dubhi, Migres, Merak. 9 stars. 7 were visible and 2 were hidden. They gathered between her fingers once again, forming an ice-cold light that pierced the soul. In the blink of an eye, layers of fate gathered at her fingertips. Amidst the changes of the constellations, the blessing from fate was integrated into her most proficient Shunshang, forming a qualitative change. The whole service multiplied 3 elements, the spiral of the 9 stars. This was the most basic use of the Big Dipper sacred mark. It purely added its own essence into her attack. It looked like a simple stroke, but it was unknown how many overlapping buffs were inside. Defense break, absolute hit, death curse, soul shake. In the end, there was only one effect that could not be understood. Big Dipper death. Heaven City Square, everyone's hair stood on end. Even if they had the divinity engraving in their hands, they did not dare to stand still and let Yishuya annotate their fate at will. Tengu's wings shook and disappeared into thin air. It reappeared 10 steps away. There was an additional cut on its chest. This time, the sharp starlight attached to the wound and did not disperse. Only traces of blood continued to rise. It looked incomparably tragic. "You're really a madman," Crow Tengu panted violently. With the divine mark in his hands, he was actually forced to a dead end by Yishuya. But what made him even more incredulous was Yishuya's determination. "You rushed to advance. Your foundation was originally unstable. Now you dare to attack me. Are you not afraid of losing control of your divinity and becoming a solidified one?" "I'm not afraid." "Could it be that you're afraid?" Yishuya smiled. He stepped forward and closed his eyes. This woman was completely crazy. No, if her brain was normal, she would not choose to advance in front of the enemy, right? Such a crude advancement. It could be said that she had already cut off her future path. Everyone had fought for so many years. How could he not know Yishuya's background? This path of ascension seemed to reflect the stars, but in essence, it had nothing to do with astrology. It directly corresponded to fate. Every sacred mark had a direct corresponding fate. Just like when she advanced to Moonfox of Heart, she was thrown to the border by the Social Security Bureau. Moonfox of Heart, the main cause of chaos. What she was best at was stirring up disputes. Wherever she was, there would be 3 feet of waves even if there was no wind. In the end, this woman did not disappoint. Wherever she went, heaven and earth would turn upside down. At the border, who knew how many things she had caused? It could be said that her destructive power was terrifying. Unfortunately, there were no dragons in the world. Her path of ascension was equivalent to directly cutting off. Shangxiu's Moonfox of Heart should have broken through to the Eastern Azure Dragon. Otherwise, how could she be stuck at the 3rd level for so long? Although sending her here to advance was a clever move, wasn't there a helplessness behind it? Relying on the accumulation of origin substance over a long period of time, using the strength of her soul to forcefully merge with Shangxiu, forcibly breaking through to the 3rd and 4th levels. Although it was amazing, when Heaven City Square calmed down and carefully thought about it, they discovered that this woman had completely reached the end of her road. The path ahead was cut off. This path was even more despairing than Moonfox of Heart. Even if there was no lack of foundation, if she went up from the Big Dipper, it would be crepe myrtle. She had to unify the center and become the Emperor. In other words, if she wanted to reach the 5th level, she would either have to become the Emperor of Eastern Xia, or the Profound Bird would give her the position of the Master of the System. Even if the Profound Bird was willing, no one else would agree. In other words, she would stop at the 4th level in this lifetime. As if she had guessed what he was thinking, Yi Shuiya's lips curved into a cold smile. You see, this is the difference between you and me. Our structure is different. Behind her, the constellation of the Big Dipper appeared once again. Starlight gathered and turned into iron, forming a pitch-black sword in her hand. The blade of the sword reflected Crow Tengu's astonished face, as if it wanted to envelop him in this fate. There are some things that you care too much about. A cold voice suddenly sounded in Heaven City Square's ears, carrying a condescending disdain. But I don't care. In the next instant, the blade of the sword stabbed down. Chapter 269. So fast. Heaven City Square's eyes widened. He quickly retreated, trying to avoid the Big Dipper sword. He felt a chill on his back, almost seeping into his soul. All this time, from what he knew, Yi Shuiya had always used illusions, origin substances, and sacred marks to create curses. In other words, he was a master of magic. But now, Yi Shuiya's swordsmanship shocked even Tengu. It cannot be said to be that amazing, but it was like a dead otaku at a comic convention who walked into the toilet and saw a young lady who had just taken a picture. Why is he faster than me? Unfortunately, there wasn't enough time for him to react. He blocked the attack with his sword, causing a crack to appear on the blade of the Big Dipper. However, the chill of the attack still managed to penetrate his soul, causing a crack to appear on Crow Tengu's divine mark. Poison of death. He retreated a step, then once again regrouped. He raised his sword and slashed forward. But then he saw the Big Dipper sword right in front of him, too fast. How could he be so fast? He could not understand. At the critical moment of life and death, Heaven City Square did not have time to think. His steel-like mind threw away his fear and hesitation, and he slashed out with his sword as if his life depended on it. The sword slashed through Yi Shuiya's body. It was not damaged in the slightest, but the divinity once again injured the Big Dipper sword. Yi Shuiya's expression did not change. Heaven City Square howled in pain. One of Crow Tengu's black wings was broken. Tengu's wings were broken. His sacred mark twitched violently, almost unable to support the burden of the sacred mark. This woman was completely crazy. He finally saw the faint light of starlight under their feet. It was countless scattered stars, but the stars no longer revolved in the same way they did in the past. The star field collapsed, and Ginseng and Shang met. The areas of Ginseng and Shang had already overlapped. No matter how he dodged, Yi Shuiya was right in front of him. This was fate. As if he could not feel pain, Yi Shuiya was expressionless. He raised the Big Dipper sword and slashed again. Heaven City Square roared. He raised his sword horizontally, blocking the Big Dipper sword. But unexpectedly, he saw Yishuiya's left hand, which was hidden behind his back, suddenly raise and press against his face. In the last moment, he saw a dazzling starlight that he had never seen in his life. His 5 fingers suddenly tightened. Blazing starlight burst out from the gaps between his fingers, and Crow Tengu's face was completely engulfed by the terrifying starlight. Origin's substance flowed out like a waterfall. The corners of Yishuiya's mouth curled up. He smiled expectantly. It was precisely because of this terrifying consumption that she hadn't used this move since she took it out from the old man's pocket 3 years ago. Now, with the support of the 4th-rank Big Dipper, the terrifying power of the inheritance on the path of destiny burst forth. Divinity application, kill Break Wolf. In the blink of an eye, Heaven City Square screamed tragically and its entire face was charred black. Crow Tengu's stigmata was instantly riddled with holes under the piercing, cold starlight. He roared. Amidst his pain, he raised his sword and slashed down recklessly. Boom! The seal that enveloped the entire silver throne shattered in an instant. The remaining wing unfolded, and he soared into the air. He didn't even have the slightest thought of counterattacking, whistling away. He ran away in the dead silence. Yishuiya quietly stood in the middle of the collapsed Mitsukoshi building, staring at his distant figure. She sneered disdainfully and put away the Big Dipper sword. Until now, the members of the Social Security Bureau, who hadn't shown their heads in the distance, poked their heads out. Luo Shun was bold. He went over and asked, "Big sister, are we going to chase?" Yishuiya glanced at him for a long time, then hooked her finger, indicating for him to come over. Luo Shun walked over, confused. Then, he saw Yishuiya vomit a big mouthful of blood. She supported his shoulder and slowly leaned against the wall. She gasped for breath. "Chase my ass. Do you really think I'm an iron diamond that can't be killed?" She raised her head, wiping the cold sweat on her forehead. "Fortunately, I scared him. Otherwise, if he reacted and fought with me, I would be dead for sure." No matter how much they were at the 4th rank, a divine mark engraved on their hands was no different from a fart. No matter how much of a divine mark it was still a divine mark. No matter how iron-headed Yishuiya was, she didn't dare to let him really aim at her. To be able to scare him away, her acting skills were already outstanding. Fortunately, Shizhou's natural disposition was too cautious and suspicious. In addition, the shadow left in his heart was not shallow. Otherwise, today's play wouldn't have been a fart. Luo Shun thought for a moment. Now should we pack up and quickly run? Otherwise, if that guy reacted and came back, wouldn't that be terrible? Run? Why should we run? Yishuiya sneered and shook her head. From the moment he decided to run, he lost the chance to die with me. The divine application of the Mystic Bird's secret technique, kill Break Wolf. Did he think it was just like a slap in the face, something that could be easily dealt with? The Big Dipper's ability to determine life and death, coupled with this kind of skill, could directly change fate. She raised her eyes and glanced at the faintly discernible stars in the dark clouds above her head. She slowly shook her head. Kill Break Wolf. The 3 stars are shining. Death has already been written into his life. No matter which direction he runs to, no matter who he meets, he is dead for sure. As if reading fate, she casually wrote down the ending for her enemy. Shizhou and Light will definitely die today, die in Yamatai. Tengu spread its wings and flew high in the sky. A long distance flitted past in an instant. In the end, it powerlessly fell to the ground. Lying on the ground, it vomited out sparkling blood. Its broken face still had traces of scorch. The divine mark trembled. He suddenly understood that perhaps Yishuiya was just scaring him. Perhaps if he turned around now, he still had time to get rid of Yishuiya. But what was the point? He had already lost. Just like what she said, he lost in terms of layout. Even with the divine mark in his hand, he still fought so unsightly. What face did he have to run back and endlessly entangle himself? Heaven City Square leaned against the wall, barely repairing his wounds. He felt anger and humiliation from the bottom of his heart. The current him already had no strength to support another fourth-rank battle. The deep cursed starlight entangled his divine mark, causing Crow Tengu's wings to twitch. Its broken face was full of malevolence and pain. What kind of divinity application was it to actually have the same effect as the divine mark of the Eastern Xia genealogy, Audiobook of Destiny? No matter what, he had to first get rid of this curse to have a chance of survival. Otherwise, he would definitely be tortured to death by the curse. He waved his trembling hand, dispersing the intense light of the ten-grasped sword. He let go of his hand, allowing the Hachi banner's bow to fly away on its own. Under the call of an inexplicable power, it disappeared. He sighed in relief. Even if he died here, the Hachi banner's bow could not be lost. Soon, 2 feathers appeared from the place where the Hachi banner's bow disappeared. They fell, landing in Heaven City Square's hands. An old voice sounded in his ear. It was not the expected reprimand, but a sigh of worry. Return safely, Heaven City Square. Failure is not shameful. He said, do not die. Only the living have a future. Heaven City Square was stunned. After a long time, he could not help but kneel on the ground. First, he was stunned. Then, he felt an indescribable sense of self-blame. He could not help but cry. I will definitely live up to teacher's teachings. He gritted his teeth, wiped away his tears, and held tightly to the 2 feathers that his teacher had given him. These 2 feathers were enough to save him from certain death. The 2 feathers rested on his temples. One of them flew out first. After circling him a few times, he felt the fate that entangled him. It was as if he could not do anything about the fate of certain death. Then, it rose up again, leading him to fly into the distance. Soon, as he flew with all his might, the feathers suddenly burned to ashes. The last ashes pointed to a figure walking in an alley. Heaven City Square's eyes widened, as if afraid that others would recognize his true identity. The person was shrouded in a black robe. Even his face was covered. Not a trace of skin was exposed. He carried a huge backpack on his back and held a map in his hand. It seemed like he was looking for a place. Under the guidance of the feather, he instinctively felt the other person's hidden aura. He also felt that the other person had something hidden in the backpack. That thing could save him. Crow Tengu's single remaining eye flashed with a hint of determination. There was no need to complicate matters and get entangled with that ascendant. He would leave after taking the item. He couldn't easily start a fight. After making up his mind, Crow Tengu, who had been hiding behind the clouds, swooped down and transformed into a dark shadow as he swooped down towards the mysterious man. It was as fast as lightning. However, at that moment, the mysterious figure seemed to have sensed something. He suddenly turned around and frowned under the mask. He waved his hand. In the air behind him, the silhouette of a steel giant suddenly appeared. As its master raised his head, the steel mask covering his face suddenly opened, and 2 sharp antennae extended to both sides. Immediately after, the pure white armor covering his entire body suddenly flipped open, and from within it, a blazing scarlet light that made one feel uneasy. Oh, 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 oh. Accompanied by a strange melody and tinkling sounds, the voices of countless people singing could be heard from the speakers. A flash of light flashed from the eyes of the huge robot. The giant border relic from the arena raised its palm and fanned forward with the movement of its master. The Laplace program's automatic evaluation began. The scanning was complete. The calculation was complete. RX 0 destruction mode activated. Maximum effort. Boom. It was as if an iron wall had been swept away in an instant, stirring up wind and thunder. Amidst the loud roar, the black shadow that had been ejected was sent flying and disappeared into the horizon. What the hell? The mysterious man looked at the black shadow that had been sent flying and shook his head in confusion. Forget it. There are many such overconfident attackers in Yamatai City. He lowered his head and looked at the location marked on the map. Following the gentle melody that was gradually becoming clearer, he continued to search for traces of the art gallery. Behind him, the steel giant's silhouette slowly dissipated. It was as if it had never appeared. Chapter 270. Tian Chengfang opened his eyes in a daze and felt pain that he hadn't felt for a long time. The cracked divine mark could no longer protect his battered body. Under the broken mask of Crow Tengu, his pale face was exposed. What was that just now? He suddenly coughed violently. He bent down and vomited blood with a trace of light. Crow Tengu's heart marrow rose from the blood and floated in the air, emitting a burst of black mist. The miracle was passing by at a heart-wrenching speed. Everything was moving towards the worst possible ending in a logical manner. It was as if nothing out of the ordinary had happened, and they were naturally welcoming death. The curse was coming true. It was as if he was watching himself gradually bleed to death. The great fear made him struggle and crawl out of the broken building. The remaining feather seemed to be unable to comprehend what had happened and was fluttering around him in fear. No, there's no time. Tian Chengfang used all his strength to prop himself up and said hoarsely, "Take me to find something that can save me." The feather trembled in the air and immediately began to search for clues in a panic. Soon, it began to tremble in pleasant surprise and circled around him twice before flying up into the air. It carried the hope of Tian Chengfang. With the last of his strength, Tian Chengfang spread out his broken wings and flew up into the sky, following the feather, gradually moving forward, until the gentle melody that seemed to be able to heal all wounds gradually became clear. The feather hovered above an ancient stadium and guided him down. It seemed to be leading him to the source of the zither's sound. Tian Chengfang was ecstatic and almost couldn't contain the joy in his heart. He descended an inch from the sky. Then he was swallowed up by a solid chill. Fear, incomprehensible and indescribable fear, rose from his heart. Like never before, his instincts sounded the alarm in desperation and wailed with all their might. Don't go forward, don't go forward, don't go forward. Incomprehensible despair almost tore his soul apart in an instant. The fear that came out of nowhere condensed into a solid substance and buzzed in his skull. It made him almost scream in this moment of ominous premonition. If he went there, he would die. Such a clear understanding rose in his heart, followed by a kind of fear that even death couldn't compare to. It almost tore his will of steel to pieces. That was a dead end. In midair, the dying crow Tengu stiffened for a moment, then suddenly rose up and flew away into the distance with all its might. It fled in a sorry state, not even caring about its wings and body that were gradually reaching their limits. There was only one thought left. Run. Leave this place. Run as far as possible. When he recovered from the chaos, he realized that he had run to an unknown place and was falling crookedly from the sky. That confused feather was still following beside him, not knowing what had happened. Amidst the loud noise, he fell to the ground in a sorry state, smashing into the broken storefront and gasping for breath. Not there, not there. Only death awaits us there. He grabbed the feather with all his might and glared at his last straw of hope. Take me to find something that can save me. My time. My time. Tian Chengfang's body shook violently, and he once again vomited out his broken organs. He saw himself in the pool of blood that spread out on the ground. He didn't have much time left. Hurried footsteps could be heard not far away, causing his heart to sink. Someone shouted excitedly, "I saw it. Something dropped here. There's no mistaking it. Be careful. The things here are very strange. F***CK. It's a bird, man. Who cares what it is? Let's kill it first." Outside the broken storefront, a few ascendants raised their weapons warily. Crow Tengu looked at him in shock, as though he was frightened. After a long time, he couldn't help but laugh. He was amused by this evil joke. Death had come, but the person who killed him was this kind of trash, recalling the comical encounters he had since he entered Yamatai City. In his sorry state, he didn't know when he had fallen to such a state. Is this my fate? Tian Chengfang gritted his teeth and slowly shook his head. No, it's the opposite. He propped up his broken body and pulled out the broken pieces of steel and iron from the wound on his chest. He raised his head and climbed up inch by inch from the countless ruins. He roared at the person in front of him. Now, it's not time yet, not yet. He took a step forward and faced the bullets coming at him. He raised his only arm and closed his 5 fingers like a knife, cutting down the iron light. You dog-like thing, are you worthy of killing me? Perhaps he would die, yes. But not now, not here, and it shouldn't be this kind of thing. Tengu roared. An invisible force emerged from the casual wave of his hand, forming an illusory blade on his arm. It cut through the bullets with ease. For so many years, he had broken through the limit in front of him. He had stepped into the legendary state of the pinnacle, the real Tengu. If it were any other time, he would be wild with joy, right? However, right now, his heart was completely calm. Like iron stone, he only stepped forward, brandishing his crisscrossing sharpness as he galloped at an extremely fast speed. In the blink of an eye, he passed by the ascendants. Behind him, blood spurted out and dyed the narrow street red. He staggered and knelt on the ground. More and more blood flowed out from his face and wounds, forming a tragic and uneasy trail behind him. He couldn't die yet. He couldn't. He had to go back alive. Tiancheng Fong gritted his teeth, propped himself up, and staggered forward with the help of the wall. In a trance, he forgot where he was and where he was. He just stubbornly chased after the feather floating in front of him. Step by step, he was like a walking corpse. After an unknown amount of time, the feather had dissipated in the wind. He was still moving forward. He numbly urged his tired body until he staggered and fell to the ground, unable to get up again. In his dizziness, there was the sound of soft footsteps gradually approaching. The person tilted her head and looked down at him, listening to his intermittent and persistent breathing. She bent down and stared at his disheveled face. As if she had found a treasure, she smiled in surprise. You seem to be very strong. Save me. Tiancheng Fong raised his hand with difficulty, trying to grab the corner of the white dress, but it was so far away and difficult to reach. Soon, a drop of sweet dew fell by his mouth. The dew with a wonderful power merged into his wounds, calling back his consciousness and forcibly pulling him back from the brink of death. He was saved, but the power of redemption stopped here. More! He gasped, reached out, and tried to snatch the bottle in the woman's hand. Give me more. This is a very precious dark gold item. The smiling woman raised the bottle an inch and casually avoided his hand. You want to take it away with empty words. Don't you think it's too much? Tiancheng Fong was stunned for a moment. He slowly raised his head and looked at the woman in front of him. She had a beautiful face. No, it should be delicate. She had a gentle smile that made people feel like they were bathing in the spring breeze. Her ponytail was slanted over her shoulders, and her white dress was spotless. She looked like she was going out to buy groceries. No matter what, she didn't fit in with this city. But only that pair of quiet eyes seemed to be hiding a darkness that the whole city couldn't reach. It was as if they were hiding something. It was unfathomable, but it made people instinctively feel fear. Give that to me. Tiancheng Fong was silent for a moment and said in a hoarse voice, I can give you anything you want, You can give me anything? The woman seemed to be moved. She raised her eyebrows. After thinking for a moment, she immediately smiled. Then, can you fight with me to the death? Tiancheng Fong was stunned. You see, gambling should be something that you're born with, right? Let's use this as a prize. The woman got up and took a few steps back. She placed the medicine that represented rebirth at the end of the street. Then, she stood in front of Tiancheng Fong and blocked his way to rebirth. The loser dies, and the winner lives. She smiled and asked softly, It's very fair, isn't it? Yes, that's right. Tiancheng Fong was silent for a long time. Then he nodded. It can't be fairer. He raised his hand, propped himself up, and looked at the enemy in front of him. After the shock and confusion, only iron-like calmness was left. There was no need to say anything more. Under the excited gazes of countless spectators outside the field, he raised his only arm and took the starting position of Tengu Shogunate. Ingzhou genealogy, Tiancheng Fong of Mount Koya. The woman was silent for a moment, as if she was thinking about how to reply. Soon she smiled. I'm Luo Xian. She reported her identity. I'm the accountant and receptionist of the Orchard Gym." She bent down, took off her high heels, and gently put them aside. She stepped barefoot on the broken road, leaving a line of light footprints in the hard stones and soil. She was facing an invincible enemy, a high and mighty fourth-order sublimator. She raised her palm and smiled happily. "Please bring it on." At that moment, a loud sound burst out. As blood splattered, Tengu's broken wings suddenly shook. As if they had turned into a pitch-black hurricane, they instantly pounced on him. Tengu's shogunate slashed down horizontally. Then, boom, a bulging fist mark appeared on his back. Then, blood spurted out from his lungs. He couldn't see how Luo Xian moved, but it was as if it was natural. She raised her hand and punched out, and a shocking power erupted from her slender and fair wrist. 3 thunderbolts. Heavens fall. The air was shattered, and a fleeting fault appeared. The cracks on the glass spread in all directions. But then the shattered air was completely cut into 2 by Tengu. Chapter 271. An iron-gray ray of light cut through Luo Xian's defense and swept past her in an instant. Blood spurted out from under her white dress. Luo Xian knelt on the ground and looked down at the cut on her chest in confusion. Then Heaven City Square heard the sound of his body shattering one after another. It was as if he had been destroyed by a thunderbolt. Every joint and every muscle in his body was crying out in pain. She was heavily injured. With just one punch, he was completely defeated. If he wasn't a fourth-order ascendant, he might have been crushed to pieces by this punch, right? But now the outcome had been decided. "I'm sorry, little girl. I won unfairly, but I have to live." He coughed violently and spat out his broken organs. No longer looking at Luo Xian, who had been cut in half by Tengu, he staggered forward and stumbled to the medicine bottle. He reached out and wanted to pick up the medicine bottle. Then he froze in place. He heard a curious voice behind him. "I've never seen this swordsmanship before. Is it the new Inryu?" "No, if it's Tengu, it should be the Tengu from Saddle Horse Mountain." No wonder. He turned around stiffly and saw Luo Xian, whose back was facing him, slowly climb up from the ground. She should have been cut in half at the waist, but she looked unharmed. Only a terrible cut appeared under her broken white dress. It was so deep that bone could be seen and blood was flowing out. When she spoke, her tone was full of realization. It was as if she had gained knowledge and learned new skills. Heaven City Square couldn't believe it. It was only a light injury? She had clearly hit. "How did you?" He turned around and stared at Luo Xian's posture. "What was that move just now?" Is it this?" Luo Xian thought for a moment, and the outline of her body floated and solidified again. The whole world became a low-quality DVD, and it froze just now. Thus, many unimportant details and the plot were lightly skimmed over, including the sure kill attack just now. Just by relying on the use of her body, it was close to reaching the realm of miracles. This should be considered used steps, but it's a technique I just figured out a few days ago. She spread out her hands and showed off her skills to her opponent without holding anything back. "Look, it's like this. When the opponent attacks, take a step to the left and a step to the right. When a knife is not paying attention, you can dodge it." He could clearly understand every single word, but when they were put together, it became absurd and strange. Was that really a skill that could be achieved by the physical body? Was that really a creation that could be imagined by humans? What kind of monster would be able to create such a scene so casually? Luo Xian had no idea how terrifying this talent was. After she finished explaining, she smiled helplessly. "It's a pity that I'm still not very proficient. I thought I was really going to die just now. But now that I've learned that move of yours, I shouldn't be injured anymore, right?" In the dead silence, Heaven City Square felt a dry cough in their throats, making it difficult for them to breathe. He didn't know why, but his originally calm heart couldn't stop itself from trembling. His fingers twitched and twitched again uncontrollably. "Be more serious." Luo Xian looked at him. "You know how to walk." He took a step forward and stood still. Then his eyes widened. Suppressing the uneasiness in his heart, he launched an attack. That was when he heard Luo Xian whispering, "Tang bamboo." Luo Xian's hand chopped down in the shape of a tang bamboo. Luo Xian shook her head. Kasaya slash. Then, Heaven City Square executed the Kasaya slash. Like a marionette, he felt a chill run down his spine, as though he had been plunged into an ice cave. He roared, turned around, and attacked fiercely. Catch Yin Fei, Luo Xian muttered under her breath. Her attacks all missed. However, a fourth-order Divine Master was still a fourth-order Divine Master. The wind howled, and a terrifying aura spread out. Like a hot knife through butter, Yin Fei's face and arms were torn apart. She was severely injured, but Luo Xian's expression was exceptionally dissatisfied. She looked at him with disappointment. Is that all you've got? She stepped forward. Use steps. Heavens fall. There was a loud bang. Crow Tengu staggered back. His remaining wing was completely torn apart, and he hissed tragically. Luo Xian stepped forward again. She ignored Crow Tengu's countless feathers and allowed them to tear her body apart. Then, she threw another punch. Earth collapse. The earth collapsed and cracked, starting from Crow Tengu's feet and spreading in all directions. The terrifying power caused blood to seep out of every pore of Heaven City Square. It was as though they were playing. Even though Heaven City Square's counterattack had broken one of her arms, she still smiled casually. You should be the kind of person who has a strong foundation and can even achieve a breakthrough in battle, right? Don't be disheartened. Please work harder, Mr. Heaven City Square. She stared at Tengu's gradually pale face and pleaded expectantly. Before you, or I die, try to leave behind some beautiful memories. So, please do your best to kill me. Heaven City Square said nothing. He had been swallowed up by the pleasant darkness in her eyes. The chill was like a tide, freezing his consciousness. As the essence hidden in the darkness revealed its ferocious outline, he couldn't help but tremble in despair. He couldn't restrain himself. What kind of monster is this? He didn't know. It was as though a viscous darkness had risen from the woman's thin body, slowly swallowing him, covering him inch by inch, chewing him up, and sinking into the final madness and the pain of being torn to shreds. The sound of bones breaking rang out, followed by the sound of internal organs shattering, and even the sound of teeth grinding and blood sucking reverberated in his ears. For some reason, he suddenly remembered a lone melody that he had heard somewhere before. It was so gentle and so peaceful. Perhaps today was a good day to die. He closed his eyes numbly. Crow Tengu had welcomed death. When the roar came to an end, the screams and wails came to an abrupt end. The flying dust and ashes rustled down. In the midst of the devastation, only a broken figure slowly walked out. She was almost in pieces. Her white dress was full of cracks, and one of her eyes was blind. Both of her arms were broken, and one of her calves was crushed to pieces. Yet, there was still a faint smile on her face. The final winner appeared in front of all the audience. However, there was no cheering in the venue, not even warm applause. There was only dead silence, a suffocating silence. Everyone's eyes were stung by the gentle smile on the screen. When they realized what that blissful smile represented, everyone subconsciously held their breaths. They could feel fear. They couldn't help but tremble. Unbelievable. The Harkin let out a long sigh. It wasn't clear whether it was in awe or amazement. Is this what a genius is like? In front of the television, the old man holding the cup of protein powder indifferently lowered his eyes. Genius? Perhaps. Perhaps. The talent she possessed had long surpassed the scope of ordinary people's understanding. But was this excessive talent the love of fate, or was it a curse? In the silence, only the sound of the phone beside him could be heard. Zhu Hongqin's name appeared on the screen. The old man calmly picked up the phone. I saw it. After a long period of silence, a tired voice came from the other end of the phone. Sorry. There's nothing to be sorry about. This isn't anyone's fault. It's just that you misunderstood her nature and had high hopes for her, Elder Luo said indifferently. Elder Luo faintly said, I'm still looking forward to her returning to human life. Zhu Hongqian fell silent for a long time before saying, I'll take care of it. This isn't something you can take care of, nor is it something you should care about. Elder Luo shook his head. Don't worry, I can take care of it. Is there no other way? There isn't. The old man asked. Apart from killing her, how else can we free her? After a long period of silence, the call was cut off. The old man put down the phone and leaned back in his chair, staring at the smiling face on the screen. After a long time, he closed his eyes. In the end, it has to be like this. He chuckled softly. He didn't know if he was proud of the bad karma he had planted, or if he was mocking his own naivety. 20 years ago, when he knew that he had reached the end of his path, it didn't take long for him to accept this result that might have been a bolt out of the blue for others. He was so calm that even he was afraid of it. Apart from that, he had only made a wish. He wished that someone could inherit everything he had, that someone could surpass him, and that someone could surpass him. Later, he met a woman in hell. 2 years later, he opened the door and saw the swaddling clothes on the steps. From that day on, he knew that his wish had come true. The baby that appeared in front of his door grew strong and fast. Even if he was not good at raising children, he still stubbornly survived his rough cultivation method. Then, he showed his unbelievable talent. Once upon a time, he was overjoyed by the appearance of this talent. When did he start to realize how abnormal this talent was? Too many abnormalities were ignored by him, and the distorted nature was covered by this unprecedented talent. Until one day, when he crossed the cordon and walked into the messy classroom, he saw the 6-year-old Luo Xian. The lonely girl stood among the corpses of her classmates, carefully looking at the twisted face of her teacher before he died. She turned her head blankly and looked at her father. Father, did you come to take me home? Why did you kill them, Xiao Xian? He squatted down and stared into his daughter's eyes. Then, he saw the happy smile on her face that came from the bottom of her heart. The teacher said that he would take us to play a game. A game. From that moment on, he realized where the abnormality in this child came from. Only in the death of something would she be able to obtain happiness. She could only feel happiness when she killed something. She could only feel the so-called love when she was about to be killed. The abyss had indeed fulfilled his wish, fulfilling his prayer without question. In the way that he wished, the abyss had granted him far too much. This blessing was far too generous. It was too generous for the human world to bear. From that day on, he did not teach Luo Xian anything. But he still could not stop her from growing up day by day, and her wish came true day by day. Just like the monsters who came to the human world. No matter how delicate her appearance was, it could not hide the abnormality in her soul. She had never gained any growth or understanding from her life as a human being. It was better to say that everything about ordinary people was a profound role-playing game for her, the shackles and shackles of cage. One day, this short childhood would come to an end. She would respond to the call of the abyss, return to hell, abandon the human shell, and become a monster that even she feared. But it was not now, nor was it today. The old man slowly raised his head and stared at the blank scroll on the wall. He found the answer that he already knew in his heart from nothingness. Perhaps, from the beginning, this hypocritical family game should not have started. Love was too extravagant for people like them. Fortunately, he still had time to write the ending for this game. Huaisher woke up from his trance. The manuscript in front of him silently turned into a ray of light. As if it had completed its task, it flew away after 2 rounds. Then, the cello in his arms also disappeared into the air. In the spectator stands, the flames in the eye sockets of the skeleton had been extinguished at some point in time. But for some reason, it felt like there was still a peaceful smile on its face. Huaisher was still immersed in a wonderful feeling just now. In the short and peaceful melody, he seemed to have obtained relief and peace. He flew in the sky without any worries, looking at the turmoil and struggle in the distance. He quietly stared at everything that had nothing to do with him. He saw those insignificant deaths fly into the sky and disappear into the dark world behind the dark clouds. In just a few minutes, it felt like 3 or 4 days. All of his origin substance had been used up. He almost collapsed. Then, he mysteriously understood something. When he habitually flipped open the book, he found that his cello performance, which had been dormant for a long time, had increased by a level. This was an unexpected surprise. But what made him even more confused was that the damned skill, premonition of death, had also inexplicably jumped from LV1 to LV2. What happened? He held the Book of Destiny and looked it over and over again, completely confused. Chapter 272. What on earth did I do? Just as Huaishir was puzzled by the Book of Destiny, he heard a knock on the door of the art museum. Although it was far away, the knocking seemed to echo in his ears. Only now did he realize that the entire art museum seemed to appear in Huaishir's perception. Every detail and change was vivid in his mind. As long as he thought about it, all kinds of things in the storage room would appear in his hands. The door could be easily opened and locked. It was like a fortress. Before Old Skeleton died, he handed over the control of the art museum to him. Unfortunately, all the things were basically taken away by the stingy music association. Only some miscellaneous daily necessities were left, and there was an exchange list. It was filled with a row of names of musicians that blinded Huaishir's eyes, as well as their essence manuscripts, as well as various relic-level instruments from the border, and the exchange price that blinded Huaishir's eyes. The starting price of source crystals was more than 10 pieces. In other words, if he wanted to exchange for East Summer dollars, even at the lowest exchange rate, the cheapest was more than 20 million. 20 million? Am I crazy? 20 million for an original manuscript, and I could only read it once. Huaishir casually put the exchange list into his pocket and walked in the direction of the door. When he opened the door, he saw the backpacker waiting outside. Mask, hood, gloves, sunglasses, and covered in a robe, not revealing any skin. He looked extremely mysterious. "Yo!" The visitor waved at him rather indifferently. "Excuse me, are you Huaishir?" Huaishir thought for a long time and couldn't remember where he had seen such a mysterious person. "Who are you?" "Number 2. I thought you heard about me from others." The mysterious person shrugged, which finally made Huaishir remember the mysterious person who was ranked above him. He seemed to be a member of the Astronomy Association, but he hadn't revealed his identity since the beginning of the competition. At this moment, he suddenly came, which made Huaishir a little confused. "Excuse me, what can I do for you?" The mysterious man shrugged and pointed behind the door. "Can we talk inside? I traversed the entire city to find this place. It would be best if I could rest for a while." "You're not polite at all." Huaishir hesitated for a moment before opening the door and turning sideways. "Although this isn't my place, please," the mysterious man swaggered in, as if he was not worried about Huaishir's trap. He passed through the luxurious hall and marveled at the gorgeous decorations on the corridor walls. As expected of the Helm Music Association, this place is really big. It's rich and overbearing. The mysterious man heaved a long sigh. "Our place can't be compared at all. They don't even provide us with food. When we sleep, we can only sleep on the recliner used to wash our guests' hair. It's so miserable. Is it that hard?" Huaishir was stunned and immediately became curious. "You are..." The mysterious man chuckled and took out a rolled leather belt from his pocket. With a flick of his hand, a row of scissors and combs of various colors were revealed from the unrolled leather belt. There was also a faint smell of hair, stubble, and ointment. "Abyss Styling Association." The mysterious man shrugged. "Simply put, it's a haircut and a bloodletting treatment at the same time." "All right, just call me Tony." Huaishir's expression twitched. The Infernal Realm really had all kinds of things. Not only did he say that there was a barber association, he even copied teacher Tony's name. Wasn't that a bit perfunctory? Anyway, names are just a form of address. Tony waved his hand casually. "If you want, you can call me Kevin or Alan. Just call me Tony." Huaishir led the way in front and suddenly had a bold idea. He looked back at Tony's backpack with tools and pinched his chin. "Isn't that?" As if knowing what he was thinking, Tony waved his hand and refused. "Your hairstyle is very good. You don't have to cut it. There's nothing to cut." Huaishir was speechless for a while. He had thought that the barber in hell would have a way to cut his hair that was a bit too long. Even if he didn't ask for a haircut, it would be fine to cut it back to its original appearance. If it's just a simple haircut, I can do it, but there's no need. Tony explained. The so-called haircut and beauty treatment is to enhance the existence of beauty to the greatest extent. Now your posture is a pure extension of the stigmata. It can be said to be a perfect reflection of the miracle in the human body. There's no need for any modification. If I cut your hair forcibly, it may also affect the operation of the stigmata itself. Huaisher was puzzled. It's just a haircut, right? Tony gave him a strange look. What's wrong? No, you probably don't know. After sitting down in the lounge, he put down his backpack and slumped on the chair. To be honest, a newcomer like you who became a calamity musician and an official culinary demon is really something. Have you been leveling up in the 10-mile slope before? What's the 10-mile slope? Ahem, it's a joke in the archaeological team. Please don't mind it. After pondering for a moment, Tony said seriously, the so-called stylist pursues the maximum degree of modification to the customer's characteristics and beauty. Whether it's shaving or dyeing hair, they're just minor details. At the end of the day, everything is to show the most intuitive beauty. Can you understand? Are you trying to say that sissies are also beautiful? Huaisher's face twitched. Don't the mountain ghosts have this kind of dark beauty? Tony's words stunned Huaisher. The first thought that came to his mind was, why does everyone know that I'm a celestial genealogy? How can I be a snitch if this continues? Tony opened his hand, and frost instantly condensed and rose, turning into a lifelike bust of Huaisher. Celestial genealogy, Dusk Road, Grade 3, Frost Giant. To be honest, there aren't many celestial genealogy sublimators now. When I saw you, I was shocked. Don't tell me you've been cheated by the archaeological team's interest-free loan. Those guys are thinking of ways to pull newcomers into celestial genealogy every day in order to open up the abyss. You can say that I've been cheated and pulled into a pirate ship. Huaisher shrugged helplessly. Then he immediately reacted, and his eyes lit up. Wait, does the archaeological team have interest-free loans? Do you still remember to apply now? It's only for new sublimators before Grade 1. It's too late for you to take advantage of it now. Tony chuckled, as if he was looking at Huaisher. Soon, the eyes behind the sunglasses softened slightly. Were we just now? Barber. Yes, barber. Tony spread out his hands and continued. To put it simply, this job is to better reflect the beauty of the miracle on the sublimator, and at the same time to correct some phenomena caused by the low compatibility between the sublimator and the stigmata, such as beastification or pathological changes. Huaisher was stunned for a long time, and then he gasped. The barber in the abyss could even correct and modify the stigmata? Wasn't this a little too ridiculous? After all, since a long time ago, the barbers of Rome were known for bloodletting therapy and surgery. These are quite advanced skills. At best, my ability can only remove some superficial lesions. Tony said slowly, now you understand, right? The guilds that can register in the graveyard of the returnless are famous for their unique skills and abilities. For example, the Infernal Music Association's soul adjustment and healing movements, the Muse Club's portrait inheritance scroll and painting summoning spell, and needless to say, the culinary tournament. From the poison configuration to the smelting of dark elemental, to the various magical recipes that are close to alchemy, there are simply endless secret recipes. In this regard, the celestial genealogy has a natural advantage, and it's easier to get their approval. If you still have the energy, you could try more. In this regard, will astronomy stop you? Huaisher nodded. Although he did not fully understand, it was a good thing anyway. Not knowing whether it was to prove his sincerity or simply not care, after the mysterious man called Tony gave so much information, Huaisher was embarrassed to maintain his original vigilance. The sound of boiling water rang out, breaking the awkward silence between the two. Huaisher reached out and fished out a teapot and 2 teacups. Finally, after rummaging in the storeroom for a long time, he looked up and asked, "Is only black tea okay?" "It's okay." Thus, the tea leaves accurately fell into the teapot, and the boiling water poured in. After Huai added sugar and milk, which was rather rare and infernal, he poured a large cup for Tony and placed it in front of him. Then, he stared at his face that was tightly covered. He wanted to know how this guy would drink it. Then, he saw Tony take off his sunglasses and mask, and a huge horse face suddenly jumped out from under the mask, giving Huai a fright. This bastard even wore a rather huge plastic head cover under the mask. Just like that, in front of Huai, he raised his head and poured the tea into the horse's mouth. Ignoring the tea spilling all over his body, he put down the teacup, shook his limp horse face, and pretended to finish drinking. Thank you for your hospitality. For some reason, Huai felt that the horse face had a smug smile on it. After drinking the tea and sitting down, Huai did not want to talk to this mysterious guy anymore. So he asked straightforwardly, "So, are you here on behalf of the Astronomy Association?" "Who said I'm from the Astronomy Association? Don't talk nonsense." Tony lied through his teeth and looked like he would never admit it. "I'm just a contestant who happened to pass by." "Okay." Huai's face twitched. "What's the matter? Then just say it." He said straightforwardly, "I'm going to leave." Chapter 273. Huai was dumbfounded. Next, this place will become a battle between Dongsha and Yingzhou. "No, Dongsha and Yingzhou," Tony said. "With my status, it's not appropriate for me to stay here." "You're still saying you're not from the Astronomy Association." "I'm just saying that it's not appropriate for me to stay here. Don't spout nonsense." Tony's horse face was filled with innocence. "You have to be responsible for what you say. You just won't admit it, right?" Huai thought for a moment, then asked, "I have to leave too." "You're not on the Astronomy Association's list of participants. You're not representing the Astronomy Association. You said you're from the Astronomy Association. Did you bring your credentials?" "No, that's right." Tony shrugged. "It's up to you whether you want to leave or stay. However, for a low-level member like you, this opportunity is quite rare. It's best if you can grasp it. There's no need to think too much about it. So why did you come looking for me? Aren't I going to say it now? Don't keep interrupting me, okay? Fine. Continue." Huai picked up his teacup and glanced at Tony. He wanted to see what Tony had come here for. Originally, in my estimation, there were only a few favorites to win this competition. Yi Shuiya, Ruan Qingyi, White 5, Nanzhou Kenichi. But now, everyone has left, and the unlucky ones have left. There are only 3 or 4 left. Now, Yi Shuiya is already advanced. I most likely won't be able to beat him. Even if I stay, I can only be number 2. However, I haven't fought with you yet." He paused for a moment, and a trace of anticipation appeared in his eyes. "So, before you leave, can you spar with me? So you're here to look for a fight, huh? You won't admit that you're from the Astronomy Association because of this?" Huai's expression twitched. Inconvenient. As if he could see that Su Chen's origin substance was empty, Tony waved his hand. "It's fine. Another method is fine." As he spoke, he took out a deck of poker cards and shuffled them skillfully. Countless cards jumped around in the hands of a horse-headed man, giving people a strange feeling. Huai shook his head. "Sorry, I won't." A mischievous smile appeared on the horse's face, as if he had expected this. "It doesn't matter. Let's draw and see who's bigger." "What are you after?" "You ran over to my side before you left just to draw cards with me?" "Ah, as a reward for fulfilling my unreasonable request." He suddenly pulled out a box from his pocket and placed it on the table. "Since I won't be able to use it after I leave, how about this?" When the box was opened, there was an old round fan inside. The surface of the fan was already badly damaged. The ribs of the fan were blackened, and there were traces of insects eating away at them. The white round fan looked dim and worn out, as if it was tattered. Tony said, "If I'm not wrong, it should be used in the next game. It's up to you whether to keep it or throw it to the Social Security Bureau. Promise him." Crow's voice sounded in his ear. "With this thing, you can sneak into the core of the Central District, the Shadow region." Huai was puzzled. "Why would I sneak in there when I have nothing better to do? There's something there that's related to your advancement. Tell me if you want to go or not." "I promise you." Huai instantly grabbed the box and stuffed it into his arms, as if the person who was hesitating and unwilling just now wasn't him. Tony's horse face froze for a moment. He didn't expect Huaishur to bend over for 5 buckets of rice so smoothly and freely. It took him a long time to catch his breath. If he had known, he wouldn't have said so much. So, each of us will draw a card and compete, right? Huaishur moved his chair forward a little. Hurry up, hurry up. Win or lose, he got what he wanted anyway. He didn't lose anything. It's probably a little more particular. Tony pondered for a moment and suggested, each of us will draw 5 cards, and then choose the flip of one of them in each round. 2 out of 3 wins, how about that? Huaishur was puzzled. That's simple. Yes. A smile appeared on the horse face. It's that simple. At that moment, in Tony's hand, countless cards suddenly rose into the air. The snow-white pieces of paper, with complicated patterns on their backs, flew in all directions as if they had grown wings. Huaishur was stunned for a moment, and then he saw the joy in Tony's eyes. It was clearly a flash of lightning, but his words rang in his ears unhurriedly. If you don't hurry up, the cards will fly away. Lightning reflex activate. Huaishur suddenly reached out and grabbed the cards flying in front of him. But for some reason, in that almost frozen moment, he couldn't even see the face of card. Layers upon layers of poker cards danced in the air, perfectly blocking each other's colors and points, making it impossible for Huaishur to make a move. But immediately afterwards, the fluttering colors suddenly changed, transforming into dozens of small birds that mixed together in a chaotic mess. Furthermore, they were slippery, and no matter how fast Huaishur moved, she was unable to touch them. Seeing his stunned expression, Tony's smile became even more delighted. When Huaishur stopped, 5 birds suddenly landed in front of him and silently turned into 5 cards on the table. Apart from the 5 cards that also landed in front of Tony, all the other cards instantly disappeared. What was that just now? Huaishur asked. It's a skill that I learned from a fortune teller at the borders of Gilsey. Impressive, right? It's very pretentious when it's bluffing, but it's not worth mentioning once it's exposed. Please don't mind it. He lowered his head and looked at the cards in front of Huaishur. Can we begin? Comparing size? Was it just purely a comparison of size? Huaishur frowned. He reached out and casually flipped open a card with an expressionless face. 10 of hearts. The first card is a 10. Rich foundation. Tony clicked his tongue and sighed. He followed closely behind and flipped open his card. 7 of black. Neither big nor small, neither good nor bad. He lost. Then came the second round. Huaishur reached out and flipped open another card. Ace of hearts. The smallest point. It seems that the current development is a little difficult. I need to work harder. If I stay where I am, I'm afraid I'll fall into a difficult situation. After Tony finished speaking, he flipped open his card. 7 of red. It was still neither big nor small, neither good nor bad. He won the second round. In other words, the final round will determine the winner? Tony nodded and sighed. He flipped open one of his remaining 3 cards. 7 of clubs. 3 7 points in a row. A coincidence? Or was it some kind of inevitable result? Huaishur hesitated for a long time. He looked down at his last 3 cards and chose 1 out of 3. He reached out and flipped open a card. Queen of hearts. Best of 3. Huaishur won. Tony was silent and did not speak. His horse face seemed to be full of confusion. He looked as if he had seen a ghost. After a long, long time, he coughed twice and laughed awkwardly. The newcomers nowadays are really scary. He nodded and sighed. They have a bright future. After getting through the current predicament, the future is promising. What was all this about? Huaishur was still confused, but he saw Tony put on his mask and sunglasses again. He got up and said goodbye as if he was ready to run away. Then, let's say goodbye, Mr. Huaishur. As he spoke, he reached out and shook hands with Huaishur. I wish you a good ranking. He left just like that, after inexplicably coming to compete. He turned around and left? What was he after? It was just a little joke. I hope you don't mind. At the entrance of the art museum, Tony seemed to have a smile on his face. He raised his hand and said goodbye to Huaishur. I hope we can meet again somewhere else next time. He picked up his backpack and jumped into a huge steel hand that suddenly stretched out in the void. Then he disappeared. He came strangely and left abruptly. It was simply inexplicable. Fleischer stared at the door for a long time with a blank expression. Yes, it's me. In the cockpit of the huge robot, Tony, who was walking to the exit area, answered a call from the outside world. The investigation of the newcomer, Fleischer, has been completed. What's the result? He doesn't look like a child with ulterior motives. Instead, he's so straightforward that it's a little surprising, Tony said indifferently. The divination result is very normal. Whether it's the past, the future, or the present, it's all hearts. There's no spade that represents the Golden Dawn. Maybe he's a successor nurtured by some old seniors who still exist in the utopia. You know, those old men have always disliked the way the directorate operates, so it's normal for them to hide things from us. The person on the other end of the phone pondered for a moment and asked, "Is there a possibility of him being absorbed?" Tony smiled. It's not a problem to absorb him. Young people are quite gullible. At most, we'll just spend more money. The treatment of the technical department has always been good. But the question is, who will absorb who in the end? This is the result of the divination. In the Iron Foundry Legion, the one with the highest achievements is you, boss. Black 10. Guess what his number is? Without waiting for the other party to guess, Tony said straightforwardly, Q of Hearts. The person on the other end of the phone was silent for a long time. Then he sucked in a breath of cold air. Oh my God. Then wouldn't this little bastard be able to enter the central decision-making room in the future? It's just a possibility. Big brother, think about his background. Maybe he's an agent nurtured by some old monster. Tony pinched the horse's nose and said in an envious and helpless tone, "How can we raise a Leviathan in this broken fish pond? Aren't you afraid that he'll become the next Rasputin? Please don't suddenly give me a task like investigating a powerful dragon next time. Okay? I was so scared just now that I almost had a heart attack. Pretend I didn't ask." The sigh on the other end of the phone turned into a pain in the ass. "Write me a report later. Remember to cut out this part. I won't change it. I'll submit it directly." After a short silence, the two people on the other end of the phone sighed at the same time. Life is getting harder and harder. Chapter 274. Late at night, an ox cart quietly traveled on a desolate street. "What's that?" In the ox cart, Fleischer looked at Crow, dumbfounded. "Divination? What divination? Isn't a poker game?" "That's right. Maybe it's a relic from the border that was used in other places." Crow said indifferently, "It's just an ordinary background check. There are too many ways. Although it's impossible to be too detailed, with the foundation of the Astronomy Society, there shouldn't be any mistakes." "Then why are they investigating me?" Fleischer was even more dumbfounded. He couldn't figure out why the Astronomy Society would inexplicably investigate a weak, innocent, and pitiful person like him. Crow coughed twice and looked away. Originally, there was no need to be so detailed to the level of every low-level officer, but you've been jumping around too much recently, and your performance is too scary. Moreover, it's celestial genealogy. It's impossible not to investigate you. They're just taking precautions. Who do you think caused all of this? When he heard that the KGB had come to his door, drank his black tea, played poker with him, and left without him knowing, Fleischer was suddenly flustered. He glared at Crow. "And who said that my stigmata is very hidden?" The premise of being hidden is not to be placed under a spotlight with a magnifying glass, pixel by pixel. Crow sighed. "I'm guessing that all of your dual videos and information have already been placed on countless people's tables. Those who are more serious will even give you a 30,000-word analysis report. After all, there are some old guys who can't fight and can't do work, but their eyes are deadly sharp. They can see through your little secret with just a glance. Then what should I do? Do what you have to do. Live as usual, eat as usual, and play as usual. You didn't commit any crimes. You're just good at fighting. What are you afraid of?" Crow glanced at him calmly and said, "If you ask me, your performance was perfect. You played the part of a lucky fool who doesn't know anything. Sigh, this is your true character. Perhaps you are the type who can act like yourself no matter what you do. Besides, with the Book of Destiny in hand, who can calculate your foundation? Is it that powerful? Huaishir was skeptical. Why else would it be called the Book of Destiny? Life is not easy. Crow sighed. She glanced at her silly boy and suddenly felt a little guilty. Don't worry. No matter who it is, no matter what method they use, no matter what technique they use, as long as the Book of Destiny is in your hands, they will only be able to see your original destiny before you became a sublimator. That's right. If Huaishir had thrown this thing away when he was 9 years old, his fate might have been completely different from now. It was just as the results of the divination showed. Sufficient foundation. The road ahead is bumpy, but the future is bright. Without the interference of the Book of Destiny, his luck wouldn't have been so terrible. As long as he could live past the age of 18, his luck would immediately change. No, according to her observation, the turning point of Huaishir's fate was at the school's anniversary celebration a few months ago. According to the original fate, as long as Huaishir revealed his talent in the performance, he would immediately be favored and nurtured by the nobles, obtaining the most precious turning point. From then on, it would be unstoppable. When he was 20 years old, he relied on his own efforts to walk into Vienna's Golden Hall. There was no problem at all. He was as dreamy as the male lead of an inspirational morning drama. From then on, he was surrounded by flowers and burned with fire. Just as he had wanted, he lived a life of respect. In the end, he passed away peacefully, surrounded by his children and grandchildren. His life's contributions would be recorded in the history books, and in a few decades, he would appear as a young lady in some messy mobile game pool. Unfortunately, Huaishir didn't even go to the performance at the school's anniversary celebration that day. Instead, he committed a crime. After giving Crow a strong dose of medicine, his fate uncontrollably deviated into the trench. From then on, he was completely separated from his original fate, and the future was unpredictable. Looking at it this way, she was simply a bad person who played with the fate of a teenager. Crow inexplicably felt a little guilty. After awkwardly coughing twice, she maintained her original reliable and calm, sisterly tone. Don't worry, the background check will be a mess sooner or later. It's better to do it sooner rather than later. After this, you'll be considered one of us, and the treatment will immediately be different. Maybe you'll even get a promotion and a raise. Then how do I explain the celestial genealogy stigmata? Huaishir frowned and pondered. Are you stupid? The Red Gloves has been dead for so long. Can't you just push the blame to him? Little Crow's lesson of teaching children bad things started again. Anyway, Green Sun's fault doesn't make any difference. You can say that you got a book from him and inexplicably became a ghost. Anyway, there are many inheritances similar to celestial genealogy every year, and you're not the only one. Who has nothing better to do than to think that this kid has the celestial genealogy's source code in his hands? Huaishir was still not at ease. What if someone thinks of it? Then you have to say it, and someone has to believe it. Crow looked at him as if she was looking at an idiot. Do you look like you're the kind of person who can pick up a divine weapon from a grocery store and win over all the girls with a single move of your tiger body, and even spend a fortune in an auction? Huaishir felt ashamed of his inferiority. Do a good job as a coward. This is a very promising job. She patted Huaishir's shoulder and turned into the shadows. In the silent darkness, other than the rumbling sound of the ox cart moving forward, the sound of clappers suddenly came from the front. Hey, it's about to start. Cheer up, Crow reminded in a low voice, and the illusory silhouette went back into the key ring and disappeared, leaving Huaishir kneeling in the carriage alone. He felt his limbs stiffen. Around him, outside the carriage, there was a constant flow of dangerous aura. The premonition of death constantly emerged in his heart. It reminded him that this was no longer within the range of the Xinyue framework, but a dangerous area where one wrong step could lead to death. The core of the central district of Yamatai, the palace shrouded in eternal darkness, the essence of the evil that appeared in the terrifying abyss, the gathering place of the superior, the place where the real ruler slept. It could be said to be a place like the palace. If not for Crow's strong encouragement and that round fan, Huaisher would not dare to come here, even if he had 100,000 guts. In the dead silence, only the rumbling of the ox cart wheels and the faint clappers in the distance could be heard. It sounded like a night watchman patrolling the night, but mixed with the mournful cries of night owls. Huaisher carefully raised his finger and lifted the curtain of the ox cart by a sliver, peeking at the scene in the fog. It was as if time was turning back. As the ox cart moved forward, the deeper it went, the more ancient it became. The tall buildings disappeared, and in their place were layers of ancient illusions, constantly changing under the reflection of the fog. Occasionally, a gust of wind would blow, and the fog would thin, revealing a person's appearance, but it was fleeting. It could be an ancient and gloomy temple, or a mirage-like jade palace, or a brightly lit wine tavern. A woman's gentle, singing voice came from within, and in the darkness, a pair of green eyes lit up, staring at Huaisher's face through the fog. Huaisher immediately let go. The curtain fell, isolating the inside from the outside. In the silence, only his violent breathing could be heard. He raised his hand to touch his face and felt the traces of cracks. As he pulled, a pitch-black abyss precipitate was pulled out from the cracks on his face, and the wound quickly healed, returning to its original state. It was just a glance from him. Now, Huaisher was wearing a strange black hat and a set of hunting clothes that he bought from a shop in Yamatai. This set of seemingly ordinary hunting clothes had already cost all of Huaisher's gold coins. This was with the title of Paradise Prince. If he did not have this title, the old man in the shop would not have cared about him at all. After looking at Huaisher harshly, the old man finally instructed him, "If you're going to have an audience, do not be impolite." Then he sent Huaisher out of the door and closed the door. Huaisher was completely dumbfounded. In this ox cart, when Huaisher changed his clothes, holding a fan in his hand, and went out at the time arranged by Crow, came out from the thick fog, as if it had been waiting there for a long time. Once Huaisher got on the cart, it moved on its own. It brought him into the fog, passing through countless checkpoints, and went straight to the core. It was as if a cheat had been turned on. Remember, you're playing the role of a minister going to the imperial palace to participate in a poetry gathering. Do not expose yourself. Crow warned, once you enter, if you want to come out alive, it will depend on your luck. Wealth comes from danger. Whether you can earn a few small tokens back or not, it will depend on whether you can live up to expectations. With the small tokens waiting in front, Huaisher completely ignored the increasingly serious premonition of death and summoned courage from who knows where. But he was still frozen by the cold, and his whole body felt stiff. The power of the divine mark was suppressed. The more he went forward, the weaker he became. He felt that he was gradually being beaten back to his original state. The celestial genealogy that had always been successful in the past was also useless here, even if he was regarded as one of them. But there were still different ranks among them. Huaisher, as a lowly commoner, was able to get a ticket to the poetry gathering. If he was seen to be impolite, even the gods would not be able to save him. As the ox cart moved forward in silence, there were only screams from time to time in the depths of the fog. Huaisher suddenly heard the sound of wheels in front and behind. Like a convoy, more than a dozen ox carts lined up, moving forward step by step on the desolate street, and finally stopped outside the dark city gate. In the front and back of the cart, there was a dark aura that made Huaisher's hair stand on end. He did not know what kind of monster it was. After a long time, the ox cart came to an abrupt stop. A white shadow silently appeared outside the door, holding a pale lantern in his hand. The voice was like the cry of a bird, hoarse and strange. A cold gaze through the curtain seemed to fall on Huaisher's face. "The forbidden area is in front. Please get off the cart and walk." Chapter 275. Huaisher took a deep breath, picked up a round fan, and held it in front of her face as if covering her face. She lifted the curtain with one hand, took a few steps forward, and stepped onto the footstool to get out of the car. The circular fan seemed to have a strange magic power. When it blocked in front of him, A black smoke rose and shrouded Huai Shi's face. No one could see his true appearance clearly, but he could see the figure in front of him through the cracks in the circular fan. The crooked and deformed servant was dressed in white. When he raised his head to look at him, he forced a flattering smile on his ugly face. He held up the lantern and limped in front of him. Noble, noble, please follow me. Follow me. He looked around in a flattering manner and waved enthusiastically at Huai Shi. Huai Shi raised his eyes and looked at the dark city gate behind him. There was also the evil spirit of Yingzhou guarding the city gate that was several meters tall. He swallowed a mouthful of saliva and didn't say anything. He raised the circular fan and followed after him. A few meters in front of him was an old and hunchbacked official. He held a strange-looking ceremonial weapon in his hand, but the head that popped out from his collar was like a snake. On his face that was covered in tumors and scars, a completely disproportionate eye was opened wide and shone with a green light. He had long whiskers like a fish, and on his forehead there was a crooked antler that was broken and covered in mold and moss. As he looked left and right, an inhuman thirst leaked out from his huge eyes. Huai Shi wanted to slow down and increase the distance between them, but there was a dark aura following closely behind him. It made his hair stand on end. In a passageway under the city gate, the huge door was not completely open. Instead, it was firmly guarded. There was a faint questioning voice in front of him, and a skeleton in tattered clothes walked out crookedly. Its bones opened and closed, making a sound. Recently, there have been too many outsiders who don't know their manners. Yesterday, there was even an assassin who snuck into the forbidden grounds and incurred the wrath of the High Emperor. That's why we're conducting an investigation. I hope everyone can forgive us. Huai Shi's heart sank. He heard a noise behind him. A masked figure suddenly turned around and ran. Immediately, the strange old man in front of Huai Shi turned his head. His snake eyes shone, and his neck suddenly stretched out. In an instant, he flew in the air, and his bloody mouth suddenly closed. With a chilling chewing sound, he slowly retracted his mouth. Then, it looked at Huai Shi behind it, a trace of suspicion flashing in its ruthless snake eyes. "Sir, why are you covering your face with a fan?" Huai Shi did not show any signs of abnormality. Following what Crow had taught him earlier, he raised his voice and replied, "It's caused by the cold. My face is not elegant. I'm afraid that I'll lose my bearing." The snake-faced doctor stared at him for a long time before slowly withdrawing his gaze. Huai Shi finally let out a sigh of relief. Sweat poured out like water. The line of officials slowly moved forward. Soon, Huai Shi saw the notice pasted on the door and the skeleton's voice in front of him. The poetry gathering is a gathering of elegance. Naturally, there won't be such a disrespectful act as a body search. As long as everyone composes a song according to this topic, it will be considered a verification of your identity. Huai Shi raised his head and narrowed his eyes. Through the cracks of the round fan, he saw the notice pasted on the door. There were only 2 large words written in thick ink. "Read thoughts." His heart sank again, and he felt cold. It was not that he was completely unprepared. Since he was going to participate in the poetry gathering, he had naturally made preparations in advance. Although it was called a poetry gathering, the poetry gathering in Yingzhou was not composed of Chinese poems. Most of the poems were composed of Yingzhou songs. There was also a lot of information available for reference. With Crow's help, he had already prepared poems for each topic in advance to perform at the poetry gathering. But he did not expect that he had to recite poems first. In order to prevent the Book of Destiny in his soul from being spied on by some existence, he did not even dare to open the book now. He could only secretly flip through the notes in his sleeves while the snake-faced doctor was answering questions in front of him. But he did not expect that the old ghost in front of him, who looked so uncultured, could compose a song so quickly. He only looked at the topic of read thoughts for a few seconds before he raised his head and sang, "Shrouded in the glow of spring, as if I see cherry blossoms. I haven't seen this person's face, but he is in love." Before he finished speaking, not only the skeleton, but also the officials in front and behind him clapped enthusiastically. The sound of cheering was endless. "Good poem, good poem." The The skeleton stepped aside and cupped his hands in greeting. I wish you the best in the poetry contest. His praise was not without reason. With reed thoughts as the topic, the snake-faced doctor could be said to be quick-witted. The whole poem did not contain the word yearning, but it was closely related to the main axis. It could be said to be excellent. The snake-faced doctor proudly raised his head and laughed loudly. He said that he did not dare and went straight in. Huaishur was left standing awkwardly in the same place. The hand holding the fan trembled slightly. Front, back, left, and right, all eyes fell on Huaishur from all directions. In his sleeves, his fingers were trembling madly. He had just found the relevant passage, but he had only glanced at it briefly and had not been able to read it completely. He only hated that the old bastard in front of him was too fast. At this moment, under the gaze of everyone, Huaishur was stiff for a long time. He opened his mouth several times and then closed it several times in embarrassment. It was only when the cold and suspicious expression in the skeleton's eyes became more and more intense that he finally shook his shoulders. Before the skeleton could speak, he took the lead and recited, "If you say you haven't seen it, you have seen it, but if you have seen it, it is as if you have not seen it." As soon as the Ing song came out, it was flat and straightforward, but it seemed to have a faint heaviness that moved people's heartstrings. The skeleton's expression became sluggish, and he listened attentively. However, he saw Huaishur take a step forward, one hand holding the fan, and the other hand raised pretentiously. He recited, "Unreasonably bitter lovesickness, a bitter lovesickness, unreasonably bitter lovesickness." Under the gaze of everyone, Huaishur's face behind the round fan was constantly sweating. He muttered this sentence over and over again in his mouth, and his heart became more and more flustered. The last sentence, he forgot the last sentence. The more nervous he was, the more he could not remember. When he repeated the sentence, "unreasonably bitter lovesickness," 7 or 8 times, the green light in the skeleton's eyes became more and more dangerous. However, he saw Huaishur take a step forward again and recite in a solemn voice, "If you say you haven't seen it, you've seen it, but you've seen it as if you haven't seen it." Unreasonably bitter lovesickness. At the critical moment of life and death, Huaishur suddenly had an idea and added the end of the poem, "Oh ho, it's over." In the silence, the skeleton, the court officials, the crow in the shadow, the evil spirits looked at each other, dumbfounded and dumbfounded. They could not understand each other at all. In short, their emotions were suddenly so complicated that it was as if someone had suddenly jumped out and tossed out one person is worth two. Although there was nothing wrong with continuing the conversation, they still felt an inexplicable urge to beat him up. The skeleton was stunned for a long time, and his jaw almost fell to the ground. Although the charm of the song is not a problem, the theme and format have never been seen before. What kind of theme is this? A bunch of ignorant fellows. This is the most widespread theme in Chinese poetry. Huaishur looked up and replied with a trembling voice, 3.5 sentences. The crow in the shadow closed his eyes in despair. What the hell, 3.5 sentences, little brother, you're finished. In a long silence, Huaishur seemed to be able to feel that the skeleton's face was getting uglier and uglier. His 3.5 sentences did not seem to be as popular as he expected. He suddenly panicked and hurriedly raised his hand and said, "Wait a minute, I still have one more." As he said, he stepped forward and recited, "Before the bed." "This is Tai Bai's poem." The skeleton sternly interrupted Huaishur's recitation. "Could it be that your excellency is here to make fun of me? If that's the case, please don't blame me for my duty to verify your excellency's identity." Following the skeleton's command, the guards on both sides of the city gate, the two huge evil spirits in red and green, came forward holding ghost gold sticks in their hands, opened their mouths full of fangs, and looked down at the weak, lonely, and helpless Huaishur. Until next to Huaishur, the curtain of an ox cart was lifted, and the figure of a maid softly asked, "What happened?" Luo Yuji." The skeleton sensed that the ox cart had arrived at an unknown time, and involuntarily trembled, crawled on the ground, and respectfully kowtowed. "It's my fault." The maid unhappily interrupted his words. Her hollow face seemed to have glanced at Huaishur, and then said in a cold voice, "This is Luo Yuji's guest. Please forgive me." The skeleton's pale face seemed to be covered in cold sweat. But just now, Your Excellency was joking with you, can't you see?" The maid asked, "Do you think that you can write the first part, but he can't write the last part?" "Yes, I'm just joking with you." Although he did not know what happened, but at least he was saved, Huaishur suddenly said in a trembling voice, "Can't you see?" As he spoke, he lowered his head to look at the notes in his sleeves and added the last sentence of the original note. He was relieved. Oh, yes, Your Excellency, Your Excellency, Your Excellency, Your Excellency." The skeleton found a way out, hurriedly moved aside, and opened the palace gate, allowing Huaishur and the ox cart beside him to drive straight into the palace. After entering the city, taking advantage of the fact that there was no one around, Huaishur gratefully bowed to the figure in the carriage. It really was a life-saving grace. In the candlelight, the silhouette that he had never seen before still did not move at all. She only waved the pipa, and a dreamy whisper sounded in his ear. "Don't worry, it's just a coincidence." She paused for a moment, and then suddenly said, "Tonight, there may be unrest in the palace. Please be careful." After saying this, without waiting for Huaishur to respond, the ox cart continued to move forward. Huaishur was left in place, dumbfounded, not knowing what had happened. Soon, an attendant came up to him respectfully and led him through the many palace doors, shuttling through the darkness. Finally, he was led into a shockingly spacious hall. The banquet seemed to have already begun. Many strange-looking officials were drinking and making merry, and there were also evil-looking ghosts eating human flesh and drinking in large mouthfuls. It looked terrifying and noisy. Huaishur quietly found an inconspicuous place to sit down, covered his face, curled up, and looked around. The premonition of death was getting stronger. It was so strong that his vision was turning black. "I've already come in. What do I want to do?" The crow in the shadows spoke. "Wait." Chapter 276. Wait? Wait for what? Wait for death. Huaishur raised his fan and shrunk into a corner where no one paid attention to him. He trembled and then looked left and right. There was not a single thing that looked like a person sitting on either side. There seems to be the smell of someone. Maybe it's a mistake. Drink, drink. The two brightly colored Ingzhou ghosts sitting in front of Huaishur raised their wine cups and once again drank to their heart's content. Very quickly, they were intoxicated by the dance music and singing. Behind the hanging curtain, the crippled musicians played the pipa and kongho, offering a mournful tune to the rotting officials. But as the cold wind blew, the banquet became even more lively and noisy. "These are all good things. Don't waste them. Quickly eat," the crow urged. Huaishur lowered his head and looked at the plates and bowls on the table. The bowl was a mess of flesh and blood. His expression twitched. He picked up his chopsticks and picked up a few cold dishes to go with the wine. The pickled vegetables were quite refreshing. Every bite had a rich abyss of sediment that spread in the mouth, bringing a wonderful impact to the taste, especially the green beans. Every time they were chewed, they would let out a scream. The beans had faces that looked like human faces and were full of juice. His eyes lit up as he ate. His originally repulsive heart disappeared without a trace. "Bring me more vegetarian dishes. Don't put any meat on them." Huaishur raised his fan and ordered the attendant kneeling next to him. "Recently, I have been eating vegetarian food and praying for the emperor. It doesn't matter if my cultivation is ruined, but what if the emperor's lifespan is shortened?" The attendant hurriedly kowtowed. Very quickly, the dishes on the table were all changed. They looked emerald green and very unhealthy. Just as the attendant was about to take the wine away, he was stopped by Huaishur. "There's no need for that. Bring me a few more types of wine," he said solemnly. "Do you know Tai Bai? He's the same as me. The more wine he drinks, the happier he gets to compose poems. When I'm happy, I'll make a poem for everyone in your family. although the attendant couldn't hide his "your F asterisk king" bragging expression. Due to his duty, he still followed Huaishi's instructions and brought over a few bottles of sake. Then, he knelt by the side and waited with his eyes wide open for this shameless fellow to compose a poem. Huaishi raised his head and drank a mouthful of wine, then picked up 2 peanuts and edamame. After chewing 2 mouthfuls, he felt a few strands of cold vitality that he had never seen before sprouting from his mouth amidst the indistinct whining. He immediately let out a long sigh of relief. Unavoidably, a wave of drunkenness overtook him. Huaishi shook his head when he saw the servant kneeling there with an expectant look. Picking up his wine cup, he let out a long sigh and took a deep breath. After brewing for a moment, he raised his head and murmured, "Ah, the horse is thin and the hooves are fat. A son stealing from his father is not considered a thief." The attendant rolled his eyes and took 2 steps back on his knees. He couldn't be bothered to pay attention to this guy, who had just snuck in to join in on the fun. After folding his fan, Huaishi was stunned for a moment. He hadn't expected that he would leave before he had even finished telling the story of Grandpa Blind and Grandma Blind's sentimental love story. "Forget it. You don't have that kind of fortune." Huaishi shook his head and sighed. As he wished, he became an invisible person that no one paid any attention to. He continued to lower his head and drink and eat. As for the cries in the distance, they were just an accompaniment. He didn't know what he was waiting for. Crow didn't say anything even when he asked. Huaishi waited for a long time, taking 1 sip of wine and 1 bite of food. After eating 2 plates of edamame, he still couldn't wait. He could only take out the list of ingredients that Crow had given him from his sleeve and flip through it. The first line of words made Huaishi's eyes begin to hurt. 50 origin crystals. According to the latest exchange rate, a single origin crystal was worth 2,400,000 Eastern Xia yuan. If he wanted to buy them in bulk, he would need to pay a premium of around 10%, which was around 100 million. Just kill me. Huaishi sighed. 100 million? Even if you killed me, I wouldn't be able to earn that much. Also, it's just an advancement. Do I really need to find a system to spend money on? Of the 50 origin crystals, around 30 of them are the cost of renting a top-notch Eastern Xia alchemy workshop. Trust me, 60 million for you to use for a week is already a friendly price. Crow calmly said, "Of the remaining 10 or so origin crystals, 10 of them are fixed for you to use when you need to extract origin substances. The rest are reserved as insurance. If you have the ability to freeload a Cavendish Workshop level alchemy laboratory, then you can get rid of this clause." Do they have to be that high-end? They have to be that high-end. The young arbiter of life's stigmata needs to be absolutely precise and absolutely stable. Otherwise, if something goes wrong, you might have to go to the Abyss shaving room to get a membership card. At the very least, you'll have to go through bloodletting treatment once a week. Huaishi endured the heartache and continued to read. Not to mention the other messy things, the materials produced in the border and the Abyss were enough to drive people crazy. Blood hatred crystal, divine light of grace, undying flame, ashes of evil. Which one of these was not a unique product of the great genealogy? Precious materials that were monopolized by various organizations and strategic materials that were tightly sealed. Why does celestial genealogy burn so much money? You have to understand that when the Astronomical Society revised celestial genealogy, it was the most prosperous and huge period. It can be said that everything in the border of the present realm or the Abyss is available. They never need to consider the cost-performance ratio when designing. No, it should be said that the cost-performance ratio they consider is the benefits obtained in the long term. Therefore, they always strive for the best. Crow said lightly, "In fact, there are versions that don't burn money, but haven't you experienced it? How big is the gap between your power as a ghost and the ghost in Nibelungen? Even if they are from the same origin, there is a world of difference. If you want to gradually unlock the authority in the Book of Destiny, the necessary price is indispensable." They were both zither, but why was an antique made by a master so much more expensive than a factory brand? In addition to the huge difference between the sound quality, wasn't it also because of the difference in identity? Huaisha understood the reason. But why did it have to cost so much money? At least there was something for Huaishir to put down. What confused him the most was the part written by Crow at the end, the most important thing. The birth of life, the true essence of nothingness, the connection of souls, the illusion of yesterday. What are these and what are they? It's the literal meaning. Whether you have comprehended it yourself or obtained an artifact that can achieve the same effect, it doesn't matter even if you have it for a moment. This is the most essential power of the young master of life. You must experience it. Compared to those tangible things that can be bought or snatched, these illusory things are the most precious and the most difficult to collect. It must depend on your luck and hard work. If we are lucky enough tonight, we can probably gather the most difficult one to get. When the time comes, it will depend on your performance. With this sentence in front of her, Huaishir at least became a little more spirited. After drinking a few cups of wine, she no longer continued to drink. Instead, she sat up straight and closed her eyes to focus, quietly waiting. Who wouldn't like the opportunity to save money? He didn't know if it was because he had stayed here for a long time or because he had finally gotten used to the atmosphere here. Huaishir felt that his suppressed, sacred mark finally had a little room to move. The calm origin substance gradually rippled. It was as if it had finally begun to adapt after diving hundreds of meters underwater. After absorbing the vitality in the wine and food, Huaishir's chaotic origin substance began to change, transforming into a type more suitable for this place. It changed the details of its attributes freely like a chameleon. After Huaishir discovered this, he couldn't hold back the joy in his heart. Didn't this mean that he could just pick up a random blade of grass and taste it wherever he went in the future? Immediately afterwards, he finally sensed the abnormality floating in the air. Abnormalities were expected. In fact, it would be strange if there was anything normal in this place shrouded in eternal darkness. But Huaishir still felt that something was wrong. As he gazed at the unrestrained banquet in front of him, he couldn't help but feel uneasy. Most of the chill brought about by the premonition of death came from the banquet attendees, but there was also a very important part that came from nowhere. In other words, this abnormality was hidden too well, so well that Huaishir couldn't find any traces of it. Huaishir picked up his round fan and peered through the gaps in the banquet hall one by one. The evil spirits who had become dissolute and violent after getting drunk, as well as the officials who seemed even stranger, either sang loudly or recited poems. Some even gathered in groups of 2s and 3s to have fun. There were also some who ate big mouthfuls of food. Some of the more elegant ones even lowered their curtains and began to savor the fragrance of the incense, loudly praising the elegant taste. While they were drinking, someone sighed helplessly. What a pity. There's good wine and good music, but there's no bright moon for people to appreciate. Otherwise, wouldn't it be even more enjoyable? Bright moon? Isn't that simple? The snake-faced physician in the banquet hall laughed loudly. He pulled out a piece of white paper from his sleeve and used a pair of scissors to cut it into the shape of a disc. He then tossed it into the cloudy sky outside the banquet hall. The white paper flew into the sky and rapidly expanded. Like a jade disc, it began to emit a lustrous light. It transformed into a bright moon. The skill of this moon paper cut technique was truly astonishing. Immediately afterwards, under the illumination of the pale light, the officials in the banquet hall began to lose all restraint. The group of evil spirits began to sing loudly and dance. However, Huaishir was becoming more and more dazed, drowsy. It wasn't just that the alcohol had suddenly taken over his head. It was also that the changes in the origin substance had harmonized with the darkness of this place. Huaishir's vision began to blur. A gust of cold wind blew over, bringing with it a sense of coolness. The banquet hall began to grow louder and louder. However, in Huaishir's eyes, that gust of cold wind suddenly caused the scene in front of him to ripple slightly. It was as if a curtain had been lifted, revealing a small gap in the void. He noticed it so quickly. In that instant, the crow in the book of destiny sighed. Don't say that I'm intentionally scaring a child. The crisp sound of fingers snapping echoed in Huaishir's ears. In the blink of an eye, the beautiful illusion was torn apart, revealing the darkness hidden behind the darkness. The hell behind the hell. Huaisher sucked in a breath of cold air. Chapter 277. With the crisp snap of the crow's fingers, everything around him instantly changed. The massive and magnificent palace hall became transparent. For some reason, Huaisher felt as if his line of sight had been pulled out from where he was, breaking free from the restraints of his body. It was like the spiritual sense in fantasy novels, shooting in all directions. Next to his ear, there was an inexplicable, illusory chuckle. Thus, his eyes peeked into the true savage silhouette in the darkness. In the endless gloom and pitch black, it was difficult to distinguish up from down, left from right, front from back, and there was no distance. There was only the shattered palace floating in the endless darkness. When Huaisher raised his head, he saw the source of the sinister wind outside the palace. It was a mouth as large as an abyss. With pitch-black, incomplete teeth, it slowly opened, and as it breathed, it became a wind that swept through the darkness. A nose that was as big as a mountain rose above the huge mouth of the abyss. Then, a pair of eyes slowly opened. Hidden behind the paper-thin moon, the eyes looked down with innate malice and mockery, appreciating every face that was intoxicated in the banquet. Frighteningly, even though it was so cruel, the half of the face that peeked out of the darkness was so beautiful, innately sacred and pure that one could not look directly at it. The remaining half of the face was covered in cracks and malignant boils. It was a mess of flesh and blood, tragic and savage, making one think of an ominous fetus. Under Huaisher's feet, the earth suddenly revealed its ugly shape. Layers of tragic flesh and blood wriggled, extending to the ends of one's sight. It was like a palm. They lifted up the entire palace. Thousands of tiny, finger-like tentacles extended from it, wrapping around every person's body, absorbing their joy and injecting the vicious poison of the abyss. The shattered fan in Huaisher's hand released a wisp of smoke that wrapped around his body, confusing the tentacles of flesh and blood around him, making it impossible for them to find any trace of Huaisher. This was his true life-saving talisman. Huaisher shivered. Huh! The blood-red eyes seemed to have sensed something after the crescent moon was cut out of thin paper. Its indifferent gaze swept across the area where Huaisher was. The round fan in Huaisher's hand suddenly let out a mournful cry. The cracks on the surface of the fan widened. In this sudden shock, Huaisher's consciousness shook and he came back from his trance, only to find that everything he had just seen had disappeared. He was still sitting silently in the corner of this banquet that was filled with fanaticism and joy. He was drenched in sweat. What was that just now? Huaisher asked in a low voice. Was it an illusion or was this place real? It's not appropriate to call an illusion. After all, both sides are real. Crow calmly replied, You don't need to be afraid. Just now, your origin substance sensed something, and the mountain ghost sacred insignia forcefully raised your vision. When you look down from a higher vantage point, your soul transforms everything that is indescribable to human eyes, ears, and ears into content that you can understand. In other words, everything just now might have been your imagination, but it is the scene that is closest to the essence of this abyss. I saw a woman. Huaisher swallowed her saliva and licked the last drop of wine from her glass. She gasped for breath. It's as if she's holding the entire palace in her hands like a toy. She's looking at us, but half of her face has already rotted away like a corpse. You actually saw her directly? Crow's tone became mischievous. Your luck with women is really too good. Who wants to be fated with this kind of thing? Huaisher glared at her. What exactly is it? The condensation of the abyss precipitation, the miracle that hibernates here, the original emperor of this city, and the foundation of this city's existence. Level 5 sacred insignia, Sun Shaman. Crow calmly said, or you can also call it me who, the queen of Yingzhou's history? Huaisher stared. Didn't she die a long time ago? That's right, but it doesn't make sense that she couldn't leave something behind. Crow casually avoided the main point and calmly said, "If I didn't guess wrongly, the entire Yamatai city was built on top of this sacred insignia? In other words, this hell was completely formed by this sacred insignia." Once again, he was shocked by the power of a level 5 ascendant. As an ascendant who absorbed the miracle of the abyss, being able to create such a large hell was not impossible. But after seeing it with his own eyes and experiencing it for himself, Huaisher still felt a shudder. Soon after, he noticed the contradiction. Then why is she so strange? Huaisher frowned. Even if a level 5 sacred insignia was contaminated by the abyss, it shouldn't be like this, right? If it was condensed and formed, then it would be the leader of a large group, the ruler of Yamatai City. But why was she hiding behind the scenes, and with a twisted appearance that was neither alive nor dead? It was as if she was mixed with something else. Now, instead of saying that she was the ruler of Yamatai City, it was better to say that she was a fetus, right? Crow saw through his thoughts. A fetus that breeds an ominous disaster, an empty shell. She suddenly changed the topic and asked, "By the way, do you remember that in the information you read before, Yamatai City was a border?" Huaisher was stunned. He finally recalled the words he had seen in the past. It was unbelievable. Why would a border suddenly sink into the abyss and become hell? Although they were both not part of the present realm, the existence of the border and hell were completely different. Although the former had a harsh environment, it still belonged to the scope of the present realm. It could be said that each had a different space. But hell was completely different from the other two. If the present realm was like a basin, then the border would be countless icebergs surrounding the present realm, layer upon layer blocking the precipitous breath of the abyss to prevent this world from being swallowed by hell. But now, an iceberg had collapsed into the sea for no reason. It was definitely not Dongxia's fault for turning on the air conditioner too much. There had to be more reasons. For example, in order to restore the broken stigmata excavated from the abyss, the entire border was transformed into a vessel for rebirth. Crow reminded, just like the coffin specially made for the stigmata, turning all of this into a fetus, allowing the broken miracle of the abyss to reform and forcibly create a new 5th-level stigmata. If you understand it this way, isn't it easier to understand? Huaisher was stunned. In order to obtain a 5th-level stigmata, they did not hesitate to create a hell. Don't tell me that humans have not created enough hells? Now that there is a miracle as a gift, it should be said that they have profited greatly. Crow sneered, integrating the miracle of the abyss into the premature child born by the Queen of Rotten Dreams, using the rotten shell as the foundation, extracting the power of this hell, and then catalyzing the fusion of the miracle, finally giving birth to the power of the Sun Wizard. The person who can come up with this method is definitely a genius. The Yingzhou genealogy is simply picking up a ghost. It seems that in order to contend with the Wu family, the Gong family has also exhausted all means. The boundary wedge of this border was broken. It may have been a mistake, but it may have been done deliberately. In the end, no one expected the situation to go out of control so quickly, causing the Dongxia genealogy to intervene, right? Huaisher only felt his head buzzing. After a long time, he finally let out a sigh of relief. Unknowingly, he was involved in the shadow of a fight between immortals, which made him a little restless. Wait, I remember that the Queen of Rotten Dreams is on the side of the rancher? Yes, after all, the two sides have formed an alliance. It's not impossible to treat them as one. Crow nodded. Before she joined with the rancher, that insect was very ambitious. Unfortunately, every child she gave birth to died tragically and could not bear the power of the abyss. In the end, with the help of the rancher's power, she was able to create a real surviving evil. Some things are just like this. They are destined to have no fate with the stage of this world. Constantly jumping around, they can only appear as supporting characters in the background. TSK, this is truly the life of a disliked queen. Her words were filled with ridicule and malice, which made Huaisher feel a little surprised. This was the first time he had felt such pure ridicule from her. But soon, she did not say anything else. Huaishur pondered over her words, and doubts once again appeared in his mind. Then, that thing hidden in the palace, after fusing with the child who died prematurely, is it dead or alive? Worm grass, do you understand? Crow said, it is only a monster that was born after absorbing the nutrients of the child who died prematurely. Even though it has a sacred mark, it is still unable to take form and can only be trapped here. Now, this palace is its toy box, and everyone who enters here is its toy. As soon as she said this, another crack appeared in the fan in front of Huaishur. It was about to be torn apart. In the corner, Huaishur's hair stood on end. In front of him, a drunken evil spirit suddenly opened his eyes and ferociously looked around. The smell of people. I really smell it. You must be starving, right? Eat more. Don't always look like a country bumpkin. The monster next to him laughed at him and threw a piece of meat on his table at him, looking very disdainful. This made the evil spirit angry, and the two of them began to fight. But compared to the chaos in the hall, it was insignificant. Huaishur knew that he would not be able to hold on for much longer. At that moment, he suddenly saw that the bright moon outside the hall had suddenly shattered, and in the dark and empty gray sky, there were suddenly 7 sharp rays of light that rose slowly. Dubhi Mirak, Fekta, Migres, Alioth, Mizar, Alcade, iron-like killing intent descended from the sky. But what was even more frightening were the 2 fleeting lights hidden outside the 7 stars. 7 revealed, 2 hidden. Big Dipper. The Big Dipper descended from the sky. Yishui suddenly appeared in the sky outside the palace, bringing with him the majestic Big Dipper stars. He raised his finger and chopped down at the palace immersed in darkness. In the blink of an eye, violent fluctuations spread out. Countless starlight condensed into iron-like metal, bringing with it layers of blazing flames. They converged in one place, forming an earth-shattering rainstorm, smashing down on the ground. Rumbling sounds rose and fell one after another. It's finally here. When all the guests' attention was attracted by the attack, Crow's voice sounded in Huaishur's ear. Right now, Huaishur, it's time for you to move. Chapter 278. Huaishur had never thought that Yishuiya's destructive power could reach such a terrifying level. When the dark clouds in the sky were torn apart, countless meteorites that had condensed into iron let out a roar, whistling through the air with tails of flames. The sound of the air being torn apart rose and fell. It was unknown how long the Social Security Bureau had been preparing, but Yishuiya had actually advanced to the peak of the 4th step in the short span of a day. With the support from all over the place, she was like a mortar base, and her firepower was frighteningly fierce. With a wave of her hand, stars fell like rain. The big ones were the size of trucks, and the small ones were the size of tables and chairs. Even if the pure quality could not reach the terrifying level of metal, was the appearance of the stars falling like rain just for the sound and light effects? The fog that enveloped the palace was instantly torn apart. Immediately after breaking through layers of formless membranes, the illusory meteorites that had been rubbed until they were red had already formed sharp blades, and when they fell to the ground, they let out a sharp whistle. The palace trembled violently. Every time a meteorite fell, it would overturn all the buildings within a radius of dozens of meters, leaving a deep fissure in the ground. Within the fissure, a fountain of blood quickly gushed out. In the deepest part of the palace, the sound of a baby crying rang out. Following the loud rumble of something crawling, in the darkness, the huge rotten face that Huaishur had glimpsed for an instant suddenly rose up, opened its mouth, and spat out vicious solar flames at Yishuiya. The intense light that gathered into a beam swept out, instantly extending thousands of meters. Everywhere it passed, all the tall buildings were cut down by the solar flames. Even if it had not formed its own consciousness, the degree of completeness of the Sun Witch's stigmata was enough to react to external stimuli. Moreover, at this moment, it was parasitizing the remains of the child who had died prematurely. It was completely equivalent to an ascendant with divinity. If it had its own consciousness and battle experience, perhaps Yi Shuiya's earth-shattering attacks would have been instantly destroyed, and then Yi Shuiya would have been crushed to death. Unfortunately, now it only had its instincts left. Under the cover of the Big Dipper, Yi Shuiya continuously split into countless phantoms, luring the Sun Witch's embryo to attack him. In the dark, Shunshang's power always covered each other, constantly narrowly dodging the fierce counterattacks. The falling of the stars became more and more intense. The battle at this moment could be said to be world-shaking. Amidst the chaotic palace, countless people cried out as they fled. They were continuously crushed to death by the meteors that fell from the sky, or they were bound by the tentacles that grew from the sun shaman embryos. They were absorbed and instantly turned into skeletons. Huaishur nimbly jumped between the shadows amidst the countless fleeting, blazing lights. The dark concealment of the Yin soul brought him great convenience, allowing him to quickly approach the depths of the palace. Furthermore, the mountain ghost's ability to sense the vitality of plants helped him to decipher the network of vitality beneath his feet, allowing him to constantly avoid the tentacles that broke out of the ground. They were like ants under the feet of two giants. Relying on his premonition of death, Huaishur began to repeatedly jump on the edge of danger. The cracks on the round fan were still slowly expanding. Once the fan shattered, he might be exposed to the chaotic demons around him. What awaited him was either being torn apart and eaten, or being turned into a dried corpse by the tentacles of the sun shaman embryo. Amidst the chaos, Huaishur stumbled as he ran, but he did not forget to ask Crow. He couldn't believe what was happening before his eyes. "You already knew that Yi Shuiya was coming? Why wouldn't I know?" Crow asked from his shadow. The people of the Ying continent sent the Queen of Rotten Dreams' premature child to the border, not hesitating to turn this place into hell, intending to recreate the incomplete Sun Shaman stigmata. Right now, the Sun Shamans have already become one with this hell. If the Eastern Summer people want to pluck the fruit and seize Yamatai, they must make a move on the stigmata. But if they don't come here, how can they control the stigmata of Beimi Hu? This place is already a place they must seize. But how can you be sure of the time? Huaishur lowered his head, dodging a sweeping tentacle. He was almost hit by the aftershock of the attack. His vision darkened. Immediately after, hearing Crow's answer, he couldn't help but spit out a mouthful of old blood. "I guess," Crow calmly said. "Yi Shuiya spent so much effort to enter this place to advance. Wasn't it all for the sake of absolute superiority? Right now, there are only 2 days and 1 night left in the competition. Even if they don't come tonight, they will still come tomorrow night. Moreover, the longer they delay, the more changes there will be. Naturally, they have to hurry." In other words, you didn't have any confidence at all. Thinking about how he had almost delivered himself to their doorstep, Huaishur's face turned pale with fright. "This is called a risky investment. Do you understand?" Crow helplessly sighed. "Take a gamble. A motorcycle becomes a Land Rover. If you can't bear to part with your child, how can you get a battle wolf?" Huaishur rolled his eyes. "I am that silly child, right?" Don't look down on yourself, young man. You are much smarter than that silly child." Crow saw that Huaishur's face had turned ugly again. He quickly changed the topic. "Don't be so picky. Let's hurry up. It's not easy to have a tall person in front of us. Let's hurry up and find something good." Boom! A burning meteor fell from the sky, smashing right in front of Huaishur. Terrifying waves of air whistled in all directions. Huaishur's entire body was swept up like a withered leaf. He flew over the collapsed wall, and fell into the courtyard behind the wall. Without waiting for him to land, he raised the axe in his hand and jumped down. The snake-faced servant, who was about to scream, was instantly split in half. But the green light that shot out from its eyes before it died made Huaishur's left hand quickly shrivel and wither. It looked as if it had aged to the limit in an instant. Huaishur rolled on the ground, opened his mouth, and violently vomited blood. Then he suddenly pounced on a big tree next to him and began to suck wildly. A meteor had instantly caused him to be seriously injured. He almost died on the spot. Find something good? It would be good if he didn't find his own corpse. It was too dangerous here. It felt like he was carrying a takeout bucket across the battlefield. If he was not careful, he would be bombed into meat paste. Even if he did not die, the final result was most likely to be delivered to his doorstep. It was not a place where a newbie like him should be. Fortunately, he remembered to hide the round fan in his arms during the impact. It did not explode on the spot, otherwise he would have been done for. Precious time was wasted for more than 10 seconds. When he finally got up from the ground, his first reaction was to throw out the recuperated red glove from the Nibelungen. Then he picked up a basket from the ground and stuffed it into its hands. Go inside. If you see any flowers or plants, just grab 2 handfuls and stuff them inside. Later, come and meet me. Be careful not to be caught by others. The red glove raised its eyes and looked at him as if it was looking at an idiot. In the end, it reluctantly carried the small basket on its back and touched the flowers and plants along the way. Be careful. Huaisher still did not feel at ease. He stood where he was and ordered loudly. Soon, he turned around and groped his way into the palace. At that moment, he felt the earth tremble violently. It was like a violent earthquake. In an instant, the earth shook and the sky shook. The originally dark and gloomy sky seemed to be lit up by flames that rose from nowhere. It turned into a blood-red color. It stung every pair of eyes that woke up with a start. Huaisher was stunned. He looked up at the sky and was about to say something when he heard a loud sound of steel twisting through the entire Yamatai city. Then he saw the sky cracked. Huaisher numbly covered his face. Does anyone still remember that this is the rookie competition? The system of the Xinyu framework suddenly appeared. The mission panel shook violently, and the final mission appeared. Survival. In the long battle, you have proven your talent, strength, and luck. Now, the competition has ushered in the final test. Please survive in the disaster that will break the sky and the earth. There is only one condition. Live. The gate of glory will open for the winner. As expected, the competition is coming to an end. Under the same red sky, in the dead silent paradise, Kitten stretched out an arm from its mouth. It flicked the ash from its cigarette and looked up at the huge crack in the sky. It laughed out loud at the misfortune of others. From the looks of it, it is really a battle royale. Yes, it is indeed a battle royale. But the contestants are in charge of escaping, and the monsters are in charge of killing. Recalling the happy times of the past few days, it was really hard to part with them. He shook his head and sighed. But the good times are always so short. Staring at the pure darkness outside the crack, Kitten picked up the phone again. Hello, where are you? He listened to the reply on the phone and nodded. Oh, very good. Please wait for a while. I still have something to do here. Aya, you are too polite. I will have to rely on everyone to take care of me in the future. The phone hung up. He slowly looked up and stared at the flash of light outside the crack. He chuckled softly. Then there was the sound of the sky collapsing and the earth cracking in the distance. Calculating the time, it is about time. He played with the phone in his hand and sighed softly. No matter how long they have been waiting, they should have taken action by now, right? As he waited, in the darkness of the central district, there was suddenly an aura that belonged to paradise. It made him nod slightly. But then, there was another one? Kitten suddenly paused. He was stunned on the spot and looked up in disbelief. How could there be two? Two. No matter how he looked at it, he could not be wrong. But Kitten found it hard to believe that there were 2 ascenders with the aura of paradise there. What was going on? Other than Huaisher, was there anyone else in this city who had obtained the inheritance of paradise? While he was stunned, he heard the sound of the collapse of the outer city. A dim light emerged from the void and covered Yamatai City. It was slowly closing in. It was the Xinyu framework that was beginning to shrink inch by inch. The rules of the human world were constantly moving away. Then, a viscous darkness that was almost boiling emerged from the abyss. It poured in from the outside like magma. It did not let go of any inch of land and completely drowned everything. Everywhere it passed, all the contestants who were caught in it quietly turned into ashes. Exit. The final stage of the competition had begun. And Huaishur heard the crisp sound of a bell coming from the darkness. Behind the red torii, the darkness danced with the sound of the bell. You're tuning in to the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.